The atmosphere in the hospital is heavy with gloom. A melancholic ringtone fills the air as the automated voice on the other end of the line says, "The number you have dialed is temporarily unavailable. Please try again later." It's 12:37 p.m. on April 10th, 2019. Kong Jae-won sits on her hospital bed, staring at her phone, trying once more to call her husband. But there's no answer, no text reply, no sign of him. He hasn't visited her since she was admitted. Jae-won, a young woman battling a terminal illness, is left to face her fate alone. The doctor has already told her she has only a few months left to live. The nurses, witnessing her suffering, do their best to care for her. But when a nurse arrives with Ji-won's medication, she finds the bed empty. Ji-won is gone, having slipped away unnoticed, determined to spend her remaining days on her own terms. While waiting for a taxi, Ji-won reflects on the contrast between her deteriorating health and the beauty of the world around her. It's springtime, and as cancer ravages her body, the flowers bloom vibrantly. How envious she feels. When the flowers wither, they still retain their beauty. A taxi pulls up and Ji-won gets in, directing the driver to the apartment she shares with her husband. The driver glances at her, his expression filled with concern. "Are you in a lot of pain?" "You'll be better soon," he reassures her. Ji-won says nothing, lost in her thoughts. It's been a long time since she's heard the local dialect in Seoul. A familiar image flashes in her mind, memories of happy times, when her father was still alive. There was a time when she truly experienced joy. The driver, noticing her silence, continues to encourage her. "Have you ever heard the saying, 'The child who died yesterday still wants to see tomorrow today'?" he asks. "If I were that child, I would probably think the same way," Ji-won replies wearily. "But even if I had to die today, I wouldn't want to see tomorrow. Nothing good would come my way anyway." The driver chuckles softly. "But if something good did happen, wouldn't you be happy?" he asks. The car comes to a quick stop beneath her apartment building. Ji-won reaches for her wallet to pay the fare, but the driver waves her off, refusing to take it. "Consider it pocket money from your father for your outing. Good things will come your way. You'll recover, make lots of money, travel the world, and meet someone who also feels like he's already dead." Today was the driver's last day on the job, and Ji-won was his final passenger. He wanted her to live well, to see that money as a promise he made to her as she opened the bill. She found a piece of candy inside. Ji-won smiled, agreeing with the driver's words as he drove away. She stood there, silently thanking him for giving her one last beautiful memory in an otherwise painful life. It felt truly nostalgic. Back to reality, Ji-won hurried into the building. She stood in front of the apartment door she hadn't seen in months since being hospitalized. Suddenly, she felt a bit hesitant, but gathering her courage, she took a deep breath and opened the door. As soon as Ji-won stepped inside, her eyes landed on a pair of red high heels, ones she had gifted to her best friend, Soo-min. Her heart sank. At that moment, she heard the voices of a man and a woman chatting in the room. Ji-won trembled as she moved closer, her anger building. Gritting her teeth, she pushed the door open slightly. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. Her husband, Min-jun, lying in bed with her best friend, Soo-min. But what she heard was even more venomous than she could have imagined. They were discussing how they would enjoy the 500 million won payout from her life insurance after she died. Rage boiling inside her, Ji-won burst through the door, shouting, "Who gave you permission to do this?" The two on the bed jumped up in terror. Min-jun panicked, trying to explain, but Ji-won was too consumed by fury to listen. She glared at him, gritting her teeth, and spat out, "Min-jun, you dog! Did you really think I'd just lie down and die without a fight? I'll make you pay for this. I'll expose you to the entire company, your families. Hell, I'll post it on social media so you'll never be able to show your faces again. I'll make you cough up everything you've gained so far." At her threatening words, Soo-min turned pale with fear. She rushed over, grabbing Ji-won's hand, pleading, "Please don't do this. We're friends, remember? I'm your best friend." Ji-won laughed bitterly, shaking her off. "Best friend? What kind of friend dates and leeches off her dying best friend's husband, all the while counting down to her death so she can cash in on life insurance? Do you even understand how disgusting you are? Sumin, terrified, dropped to her knees, begging Ji-won not to expose her to her family and the company. Through her sobs, she cried, "Please, don't ruin my life. I have to live. You're going to die anyway, but I'm not." Those words ignited Ji-won's fury. Without thinking, she grabbed Sumin by the hair, her rage blinding her as she shook her violently. But before Ji-won could act any further, Min-jun stepped forward and struck her across the face with enough force to leave her dazed and stumbling. Ji-won stood in shock, staring at Min-jun. "Did you just slap me?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. He shrugged casually and sneered. "You can hit others, but others can't hit you. Just get lost already. Stop dragging us all down with your miserable life. You're going to die anyway, so why bother tormenting everyone else?" Feeling utterly defeated, Ji-won's voice trembled as she replied, "It's because of you and your family that I ended up like this. Your family looked down on me because I grew up without a mother. My dad died of cancer and you took all my money to invest in your worthless stocks. If I'd been hospitalized earlier, maybe I could have survived longer, but now? Even if I die, I'll drag all of you down to hell with me. I won't let any of you die peacefully." Her words left Min-jun both shocked and furious. In a blind rage, he raised his hand and struck Ji-won again. She was too weak to dodge, and her head slammed into the corner of the table. Fresh blood poured out, and Ji-won collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Min-jun and Sumin looked down at her, but they didn't even care anymore. They were too consumed with panic over what to do next. Sumin nervously muttered, "What are we going to do now?" while Min-jun paced, his eyes betraying a hint of panic. Things had escalated far beyond their control. As for Ji-won, in her fading moments, the doctor's words echoed in her mind. 3 months at the shortest, 6 at the longest, and if a miracle happens, maybe 10. But at the age of 37, Ji-won would not even live out those few short months. In the midst of her pain, she heard a voice, a warm, loving voice. It was her father's. His presence was so unlike the cruel intentions she had just faced. Juen turned toward him joyfully. She saw her father's familiar figure, his hand reaching out to her. In that moment, memories of the promise she made to him flooded back. "You must live a truly happy life in the future," he had told her. She had agreed to that promise long ago. Her father smiled at her, content, before slowly fading away. As cherry blossom petals bloomed and fell to the ground outside, Ji-won's world went quiet. Suddenly, a noise jolted Ji-won awake. Someone was gently shaking her shoulder. When she opened her eyes, she was startled to see Assistant Jae, a colleague who had left the company 10 years ago. Concerned, Jae asked, "Ji-won, are you okay?" Ji-won, still dazed, tried to make sense of what was happening. She looked in the mirror and was shocked to see herself looking young and full of life. What on earth is going on? The last thing she remembered was being struck by Min-jun, hitting her head on the table and dying. Now, here she was, alive. Confused and bewildered, she glanced at the phone on the table. It was vibrating. Ji-won picked it up and stared at the screen. The phone was familiar, the one she used years ago. The date displayed was April 10th, 2009. She quickly reached for her glasses and put them on to see clearly. "Ending a painful marriage by being killed by my husband and best friend. Yet here I am, back in my life 10 years ago. What is happening? Am I dreaming? Is this some kind of replay of the life I always wished for before I died?" Ji-won sat down in the chair, her mind racing. Why had she returned to 10 years ago? She was puzzled, her thoughts spinning wildly, when suddenly a familiar voice called out behind her. That voice made her heart race and her vision darken with anger. She turned around, and there he was, Min-jun pretending to care. "What are you doing out here? You don't look too well. Should I buy you some medicine?" he asked, feigning concern. But looking at his face now, all Ji-won could think of was how he had once yelled at her in anger, how he had humiliated and betrayed her. Hatred surged through her body. She stood up abruptly, filled with fury, and began to walk away. Min-jung grabbed her hand, confused. "Why are you acting like this all of a sudden?" he asked. Ji-won angrily yanked her hand free, shouting, "Let go of me! Don't talk to me, and don't ever look at me again!" Just then, another voice called out from behind her. "Ji-won? What's going on? I heard some arguing in here." The voice sent a wave of panic through her. It was Su-min, her so-called best friend and the woman who had slept with her husband. Just the sight of her made Ji-won feel utterly nauseous. She couldn't believe that even after dying, this couple was still clinging to her life. She muttered curses under her breath. "Go to hell, you scumbags." Su-min, still clueless, asked, "What's wrong, Ji-won?" Looking at her fake, concerned expression, Ji-won trembled with rage. The anger boiled inside her, and she wanted nothing more than to lash out. The resentment she had suppressed for so long was bubbling to the surface. Just as she was about to act, Assistant J appeared and interrupted. "The manager is looking for you," Assistant J said, urging her to hurry over. Ji-won wiped away her tears with the back of her hand and left without another word. Yet sorrow still gripped her heart. "Where am I? Why couldn't I have died more beautifully?" She felt lost, trapped in the memories of 10 years ago, where someone always stood alone in her mind. Someone distant yet familiar, always in shades of black and white. Ji-won walked into the office, her eyes landing on the nameplate on the desk. Jo Jin-hyuk, manager. Suddenly memories came flooding back. This was her stern superior from 10 years ago. The tall man, always dressed in a plain suit, never spoke unless absolutely necessary. As soon as she entered, his sharp voice greeted her. "Miss Kong Ji-won, this is the company. I expect you to clearly distinguish between personal matters and work." He handed her a stack of documents and added, "If there's nothing else, you should leave work early." Ji-won noticed a handkerchief placed on top of the documents. Jin-hyuk's tone softened ever so slightly as he spoke again. "Manage your personal emotions so they don't affect your colleagues." She quickly bowed her head in thanks and turned to leave, lost in her thoughts. As she walked, she accidentally tripped over a trash can. Before she could fall, a pair of hands reached out and caught her. "Are you okay?" came a concerned voice from behind her. The familiar voice of the department head echoed in her ears. This was the first time Ji-won had come face to face with the department head, standing so close to him. Ji-won replied that she was fine, pushed the department head away, and hurriedly ran off. Jin-hyuk just silently watched her, saying nothing. After tossing the documents onto her desk, Ji-won thought to herself that she had to get out of there. Perhaps reliving this hellish time was her punishment. But she absolutely couldn't just accept it like this. She left, leaving her colleagues in shock. In the elevator, Ji-won still couldn't believe she was back in this time, with even some things that weren't part of her past life's memories. What on earth does the universe want by bringing me back here, she wondered. The image of her earlier moment with the department head flashed in her mind. Lost in thought, she suddenly heard someone asking her something. It turned out the elevator doors had opened, and her colleagues were asking if she was getting off. She quickly apologized and stepped out. In her haste, she tripped over the elevator door. This time, no one was quick enough to catch her. She remembered that in her past life, she had also fallen in front of Jin-hyuk, and he hadn't caught her then either. Why is it like this today, she thought. At that moment, her colleagues worriedly asked if she was okay. Jae-won, feeling all mixed up, thanked them and ran out of the company as fast as she could. This time, she didn't trip at the door. She sprinted away from that suffocating place, and it wasn't until she was outside that she finally stopped to catch her breath. Ji-won gazed at the cherry blossoms blooming around her. It reminded her of the day she had left the hospital. Still a bit dazed, her phone suddenly rang. It was a call from that jerk Park Min-wan. Naturally, Ji-won coldly hung up on him. She snapped her phone shut and turned towards the bus stop. She still wondered if today was just a dream. But why was it 10 years ago, the very year I married that scumbag Park Min-hwan? This dream felt too strange. Just then, her phone buzzed again. This time it was from department head Jin-hyuk, not the other guy, so she answered. On the other end, he informed her that he had sent some additional documents and reminded her to check them when she got back to work. Her mood was sour, so she only gave casual replies. "Tomorrow at work," he added. Without thinking, she replied, "Tomorrow is Sunday." Realizing her mistake, she apologized and quickly hung up the phone, feeling embarrassed. Ji-won wondered if tomorrow would still come for her. Suddenly, she discovered something intriguing in her pocket. Astonished, she pulled it out to take a look. She was taken aback by what she saw. The cash and candy she had received from the driver who took her back to the apartment. Tears welled up in her eyes. It wasn't just some magic trick or illusion. It was her dad's final gift to her. She silently thanked her dad, realizing she really had travelled back 10 years in time. This must be his way of giving me another chance, she thought. She bowed her head, silently promising to live a new life filled with joy and happiness. Maybe her dad was hoping for that too. Meanwhile, back at the company, Park Min-hwan was glued to his phone, frustrated. He had called Ji-won countless times, but she just wouldn't pick up. Why is she acting so different all of a sudden? He couldn't understand what was going on with her, and she had even left her bag behind. At that moment, Jo Soo-min, sitting across from him, curiously asked if he had managed to reach Ji-won. Min-hwan sighed and said it was no use. Ji-won was clearly upset about something. He planned to clock out soon and go find her, plus bring her bag back. Seeing his concern, Soo-min suggested they swing by Ji-won's favourite chicken joint after work to grab some takeout for her. "She'll totally love it," Soo-min said with a smile. Min-hwan happily agreed. Just then, the department head voiced his annoyance from the back. "Park Min-hwan, if you're still in the work zone, it's time to focus on the task at hand." His boss's words instantly had the two scrambling to apologize. Back at her seat, Soo-min pulled out her phone, scrolling through the messages she had sent to Ji-won, all unread. Her innocent face now twisted with resentment. Is she really ignoring all my messages? She wondered bitterly. Outside, it was a sun-soaked day full of bright vibes. Ji-won returned to her apartment, and as she entered her password, she suddenly realized it was still set to Park Min-hwan's birthday. "I need to change this right away," she thought. She quickly switched it up, then swung the door open and stepped inside. The familiar house appeared before her, but the first thing she saw were two framed photos of her with Min-han and Soo-min. Next to them was a plush duck bear, a friendship token that Soo-min had once gifted her, saying, "Whatever I like, you like too." Little did Ji-won know back then that Soo-min liked more than just plush toys. She liked her boyfriend too. Looking back, all the guys Ji-won had a crush on eventually confessed to Soo-min. But now she couldn't care less about any of that. For Ji-won, money was her priority. She tossed the photos and stuffed bear into the trash without a second thought. She then went into her room and dug out her savings book. Money. That's what I need now more than anything. She regretted not paying more attention to finances during her first run at life. I should have memorized some lottery numbers or stock trends. But now she had to deal with her debt and start making money. Suddenly she remembered how, back then, Park Min-hwan had a knack for making any stock he touched soar. I could use that to my advantage. This was a once-in-a-lifetime money-making opportunity. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Min-han saying he'd bring over fried chicken and chat for a bit. Ji-won was taken aback. Fried chicken? She had always found it nauseating whenever he mentioned fried chicken before, so why was he suddenly offering to buy it for her now? She decided it was time to move out, but before that she needed to deal with Min-hwan and Soo-min. Ji-won texted Min-hwan back, setting up a meeting with him and Soo-min at the bar near her place. Park Min-hun was taken aback when he received such a short message from Ji-won. What on earth is going on, he wondered. trying to figure out what had caused her to act this way. As he stared at his phone, his boss, Joe Jennyhook, reminded him to finish the report he had been assigned. Min-hwan reluctantly dropped his phone and handed the report over to his boss. However, his report was quickly torn apart, and he could only bow his head in apology. Veen Hook coldly reminded him to focus on his work. "The office isn't a place for you to do homework," he said, tossing the report onto the table. Min-hwan was furious, but he could only mutter under his breath, "John Hookett, that guy only got his position through connections." Across the table, Jo Soo-min winked and handed him a note inviting him out for drinks after work. Min-hwan thought to himself, Soo-min really knows how to brighten people's moods. She's just so adorable. He quickly wrote a note back to Soo-min, telling her that Ji-won had invited everyone for drinks near her place after work. Soo-min sweetly smiled in agreement, but inside she was silently fuming, cursing Ji-won for ignoring her messages. Min-hwan decided to go down and tidy up the car first. Ji-won's used to my messy car, but Soo-min's different. In that moment, he realized Ji-won didn't act like a typical girl at all. Meanwhile, Ji-won was standing in front of her wardrobe, unable to believe how she had dressed 10 years ago. How did I not see it? Everything she owned was just outdated button-up shirts. She hadn't even bothered with makeup and always tied her hair in a ponytail, wearing oversized glasses that completely hid her beauty. Since today would be the last party with her boyfriend and best friend, she couldn't afford to go out looking like this. Ji-won picked up her curling iron and plugged it in. Just then, her phone buzzed with a new message, but because it was resting on the edge of the table, the phone slipped and fell to the floor. Ji-won reached down to pick up the phone, but just as her hand was about to touch it, she froze. A memory from the past suddenly came rushing back. She remembered sitting at her vanity, turning on the curling iron when a message had come in. The phone had dropped, and as she bent down to pick it up, her hand got caught in the cord, causing the curling iron to fall and burn her wrist. This time, however, Ji-won was careful. She picked up the phone gently, and her wrist remained unharmed. It was as if she had learned from her past mistake. The realization hit her. Fate could be changed. On her phone was a message from Min-hwan, saying he was on his way and that he had a gift for her. A gift? Ji-won thought back, rummaging through her memories. That day, Min-hwan and Soo-min had brought beer and fried chicken. Back then, she hadn't realized how well those two clicked together. A plan started forming in Ji-won's mind. If they liked each other so much, then let Soo-min marry Park Min-hwan in my place. She arrived at the bar early to wait for the others. She hadn't even taken more than a few sips of her drink when she heard someone calling her name. It was Min-hwan and Soo-min, the lovey-dovey couple arriving together. Soo-min cheerfully suggested that she would treat everyone to drinks today. Min-hwan explained that Soo-min had come here out of concern for her. Soo-min asked Ji-won how she was doing, pretending to be concerned. Ji-won couldn't stand her fake worry, so she casually replied, "Just to get it over with." She ordered food and asked the other two if they wanted anything else. Min-hwan, noticing a dish on the menu, asked Soo-min if she could eat that one, suggesting they order something different. Soo-min just smiled and said, "I like everything Ji-won likes." Ji-won noticed the earrings Soo-min was wearing. Soo-min had given her a pair just like them, and Ji-won had worn them without realizing they didn't suit her at all. In front of Ji-won, Soo-min chatted with Min-hwan without a care in the world. Min-hwan remarked that he was surprised the two were such close friends since they looked so different from each other. Soo-min grinned and said, "Ji-won had no friends growing up, so she always clung to me. Because she was petite, she could only wear clothes like this." Then Soo-min turned to Ji-won and, with a hint of jealousy, remarked that Ji-won was as big as a giant. Her words stung more and more, crossing the line. Soo-min placed her hand in Min-hwan's and explained that his hand was so big, almost like Ji-won's. Soo-min laughed and said she wanted to be like Ji-won, a beautiful giant standing in front of the demon Min-hwan. Ji-won calmly sipped her drink, unfazed. Then she spoke up, hinting that their portions were the same. She asked, "What were you doing while you were growing up like this?" Su-min, flustered by the question, quickly changed the subject and raised her glass with Min-hwan. The three of them toasted to their first time drinking together. Ji-won wasn't interested in clinking glasses with this couple. She silently watched their fake camaraderie. Soon, the boneless chicken was served, and Su-min exclaimed it looked gross. Min-hwan asked her if she had just said she liked it. Su-min, trying to cover, quickly replied, "Well, if Ji-won likes it, then everyone must like it, right?" She complimented Ji-won, saying she ate so well and that it must be delicious. Ji-won calmly called her out. "You called for chicken the last time we ate together and even ordered 3 bottles of soju." Su-min's face turned awkward, forcing a smile and asking if she really had done that. At that moment, the staff brought out the fish cake soup, but a drunken man stumbled by, knocking into the server and causing the hot soup to splash everywhere. The scalding liquid landed all over Ji-won's hand. She instinctively hugged her injured hand, wincing in pain. The server rushed over, apologizing profusely and quickly going to fetch ice and ointment. Su-min asked if Ji-won was okay, reaching out to check her injury, but Ji-won pushed her hand away. Su-min was utterly shocked. Ji-won coldly stood up, saying she was going to the restroom for a bit. Inside, she anxiously rinsed the burn under cold water. Her mood was foul as she thought about the strange coincidences that kept happening. Why didn't I fall in the office this afternoon but still tripped on the elevator stairs? The burn on her hand was eerily similar to the one she got from a hair straightener 10 years ago. Could it be that in this lifetime I still couldn't escape marrying that jerk Min-hwan? Is it true that what's meant to be will be? Ji-won thought, as she turned off the tap, determined not to let that happen. Returning to the dining table, Su-min was still using alcohol to act out. She was getting bolder, pretending to be cute in front of Min-hwan. Ji-won knew all too well that Su-min was putting on a show. 1 drink and Su-min would be flushed, while she could handle 3 or 4 bottles without breaking a sweat. However, Ji-won didn't bother to expose her. Suddenly, Su-min asked Min-hwan what he liked about Ji-won. Min-hwan smiled, praising Ji-won for being kind, smart, and very capable, saying she was a great match for him. Su-min chimed in, nodding in agreement, claiming she had a good eye for people. Ji-won silently scoffed. The two of them were such a perfect match in their act. Su-min smiled cutely, opening her mouth to ask Ji-won for a piece of fish cake. Ji-won's expression turned icy as she stuffed a huge piece into Su-min's mouth, making her choke. Oh, how the tables have turned, Ji-won thought. She activated her acting skills, asking if Su-min was okay. "I told you to eat slowly, you seem pretty tipsy. Let me call a taxi for you to head home." Su-min hurriedly explained she wasn't drunk at all, but Ji-won wasn't having it. Without hesitation, she forcibly pulled Su-min up and pushed her into a taxi. As soon as the door slammed shut, the car sped off. Ji-won felt a rush of liberation. She had been so cowardly in the past, she could have easily kicked Su-min out like this, but had lived like a fool, letting her bully her. Min-hwan sat in the cafe, feeling regretful, as he realized how happy he had been when Su-min was around. Ji-won had never been that charming to him. Ji-won returned to her seat, and Min-hwan still asked about Su-min. He even complimented Su-min's cuteness in front of Ji-won. Ji-won didn't care. She told him to drink more, since tomorrow was the weekend anyway. While pouring the wine, she accidentally splashed it onto her own glasses. Giving Min-hwan a sly smile, she deliberately took off her glasses right in front of him. He was dazzled, praising Ji-won for looking stunning without her glasses. He even suggested she should consider surgery. Ji-won smiled, weighing her options. "Should I wait for a raise or dive into buying stocks?" She casually asked Min-hwan if he could give her a little lesson on stocks. As soon as stocks were mentioned, Min-hwan perked up with excitement. When it came to stocks, he could talk endlessly, like a never-ending blockbuster. After finishing their meal, Min-hwan was driving Ji-won home. She thanked him for bringing her bag back to her. Little did she know he took the initiative to plant a sweet kiss on her forehead, wishing her a good night. Ji-won suppressed her disgust, urging him to hurry back. After stepping into the house, she slumped onto the sofa feeling utterly drained. The phone was playing a recording of Min-hwan talking about stocks. Ji-won flashed a satisfied smile. This compensation will be received in full, not a single penny short. The next morning, Ji-won texted Min-hwan, telling him she was still feeling tired and would be staying home to rest, promising to reschedule their date for another time. Then she lost interest, clapping the phone shut and stashing it in her pocket. She strolled into the bookstore, hoping to grab some guidebooks on stocks. She stood there for quite a while, contemplating, but the books were packed with so much industry jargon that she couldn't wrap her head around any of it. Still on the hunt for more basic reads, she spotted a book that looked pretty straightforward, but when she reached up to grab it, it was just out of her grasp. What kind of book is stacked so high, Ji-won thought. I'm already over 1.7 meters tall and still can't reach it. How is anyone else supposed to grab it? Suddenly, a hand reached out, helping her grab the book. Ji-won turned around to thank the person, but to her surprise, it was none other than the department head, Jin-hook. He held the book in his hand and curiously asked her if she was planning to quit her job. Ji-won was taken aback by the question. She stammered, at a loss for words. Jin-hook calmly asked again if she was considering quitting her job. Ji-won quickly composed herself and reached out to grab the book. She explained that she wasn't planning to quit, but had noticed Park Min-hwan getting into stock investments and was thinking about trying her hand at it too. Little did she know, Jin-hook's expression turned sour. Why on earth did I run into the department head here, she thought, and why did I have to provoke him? She quickly made up an excuse, claiming that she had already picked out her books and wanted to leave early. But then Jin-hook suddenly asked if she was planning to meet Park Min-hwan. Ji-won forced a smile and replied that she wouldn't be meeting Min-hwan today. She also asked if he could keep their meeting a secret from the other staff. Jin-hook raised an eyebrow and asked why he should do that. Ji-won hesitated and explained that she had told Min-hwan she was sick. He asked if she was really unwell, to which she smiled and replied that she was perfectly fine. It was just the weekend and she wanted some time alone. Jin-hook seemed about to say something, but when Ji-won asked, he simply said it was nothing. He turned as if looking for a book on the shelf and told her to head home, saying they would see each other at the office tomorrow. Ji-won prepared to leave, but couldn't shake the feeling that he seemed to have something more to say. Suddenly, he glanced up and complimented her earrings, saying they suited her well, unlike the previous pair. Ji-won was taken aback. Those earrings were likely the ones Soo-min had given her as a friendship token. She remembered that the department head had also mentioned that the previous earrings didn't suit her. She politely bowed to thank him and asked to leave first. For some reason, she felt a strange discomfort in her heart, but didn't dwell on it. She didn't notice Jin-hook watching her thoughtfully from behind. The next day, after arriving at work, Ji-won looked at the clock, which showed just past 7, and noticed the office was completely empty. She sighed, realizing this was the first time she had come to work so early. Suddenly, she spotted Jin-hook, who had been there for who knows how long. Curiously, she walked over to him and saw that he was sitting with his eyes closed, looking like he was in a deep sleep. She pulled the curtain shut, commenting that if he was tired, he could have come in a bit later. She stared at him, realizing his skin looked even better up close. Without his glasses, he looked just as handsome. Jin-hook suddenly opened his eyes, surprised to see Ji-won standing so close. He asked if she was really at work this early. Ji-won jumped a little, then laughed and replied that she was making up for leaving early last Friday. She quickly returned to her desk and fired up her computer. As she did, she recalled what Park Min-hwan had said about the pharmaceutical company, GA. Right now, the stock was priced at 8,001, and if she remembered correctly, this stock was about to pass its review. In a month, the price would skyrocket 6-fold. Now was the perfect time to cash in on some investments. So focused was she that she didn't notice Janook had sneakily crept up behind her. He said it was convenient to grab breakfast, so he got her coffee and a morning meal. Janook hesitated instinctively, preparing to decline, but then she paused. If she wanted to change, she should stop this habitual rejection. She decided to flash a bright smile and thank him. Thanks for treating me to food. From now on, she would embrace life and welcome the care of others. Jin-hook furrowed his brow in silence as if taken aback by something. Then he turned and told her to keep working before walking away. Ji-won was left feeling bewildered. Did he just blow up? It's true they were getting closer, but she still couldn't quite grasp his character. She turned back to the computer, shaking off what had just happened. Forget about it. There was something far more important going on right now. It was 8:23 a.m., and she had just finished the breakfast that the boss had picked up for her. Then, diving into the stock market with a sprinkle of fun, she started investing in GA Pharmaceuticals. She snatched up 2,500 shares, investing 20 million won like a true stock market superstar. Just then, Assistant Jane arrived at the company, ready to steal the spotlight. Department head Kim also showed up and chatted with the manager in the meeting room. Next up was the dynamic duo, the handsome guy and the green tea, who just so happened to bump into each other right outside the company gate. Soo-min casually asked why Ji-won had arrived so early, but she coldly replied that, at the office, she should call her assistant Kong. Soo-min shyly apologized to Ji-won. Min Hanan, standing on the sidelines, disagreed, saying that no matter what, they were still best buddies and there was no need to be so stiff like that. Ji-won didn't even look at him, remaining focused on her computer as she told him he should pay more attention while at the office. Min Hwan seemed oblivious to Ji-won's unusual behavior. He chuckled and inquired why she was sipping on an Americano today instead of her usual cappuccino. Ji-won kept a straight face, sipping her coffee. "This is a gift from my boss," she said, then added, 10 years ago, I was all about sweet treats like cappuccinos, while the boss was the only one who enjoyed the bitter notes of an Americano. No matter how bitter it gets, I still prefer sipping on an Americano." What did someone like Park Man-won even have to say about that? Ji-won stood up, pretending to stroll past Park Man-won's desk. He was currently in the peak phase of stock acquisition, and she wasn't about to let him rake in all the profits alone. Ji-won glanced at his computer screen and saw him selling shares of GA Pharmaceuticals. She was taken aback. Why on earth was he selling at this moment? Could it be that the future had changed? What on earth was his reasoning for selling those shares? They were supposed to skyrocket 5-fold in a month. What was going on? The only fate she wanted to change was her own. 10 years ago he had invested in GA Pharmaceuticals, and the profits had multiplied. But why had she just seen him sell a total of 3,500 shares? Why was this happening right after she bought those shares? Ji-won bit her lip, completely puzzled by Park Min-hwan's calculations. Suddenly, Min-hwan asked what was wrong, startling Ji-won. She forced a smile and said it was nothing, reminding him that the stock price of GA Pharmaceuticals was on the rise. Park Man-hwan shrugged it off, saying he had already made a bit of profit and sold everything. Just last weekend he had caught wind of some favourable news. There were whispers that M-Dub Technology would partner with ET Electronics, and he was sure it would explode soon. As Park Man-hwan rambled on about the intel he had gathered, Ji-won was lost in thought. A company like M-Dub, even one as clueless about stocks as her, was well known after introducing new technology in mobile phones. The stock price had skyrocketed in no time, only for the CEO to flee abroad a month later, causing massive losses for investors. But why was he planning to invest in such a company now? After grabbing the documents, Park Man-hwan winked at her, saying he was sharing this news with her alone and that she shouldn't tell anyone. He left, leaving Ji-won deep in thought. If things that never happened in the past were to occur, it meant a different future would unfold. The futures of those involved would also shift. She rolled up her sleeve to check the time. If the events from the past were to unfold, could it be said that she had snatched away someone's luck? She had to find out, but how should she go about it? Min-hwan returned to his desk. Ji-won approached and asked if he wasn't going to have lunch. He replied that he was just about to go eat. She smiled and told him she was also planning to grab a bite, asking if he wanted to join her. Moments later, Ji-won, Park Man-hwan and Soo-min stood in front of the elevator. Soo-min cheerfully remarked that it seemed like this was the first time the three of them were having lunch together at the office. Park Man-hwan was surprised and asked why she was inviting them to lunch today. Didn't she usually avoid having others gossip about her love life at work? So they had never eaten together before. Just a moment ago she had been laughing and inviting him to join her, yet Ji-won remained pensive and silent. Noticing her silence, Soo-min asked if Ji-won had just bought that shirt, saying she had never seen her wear it before. She smirked and complimented her, saying the shirt looked great and really suited her. Ji-won merely smirked back, thanking her. In that moment, she was thinking that in just a little while, the white shirt she had just been complimented on would be drenched in soup, turning it into a filthy mess in the company cafeteria. The three of them stood in line to choose their meals. Soo-min cheerfully told the chefs that she loved kimchi soup and asked for a generous serving. The chef happily obliged, serving her a full bowl of kimchi soup, while she smiled and thanked him. Ji-won, standing next to her, coldly said she only needed a little soup. After getting their food, she and Soo-min went ahead to find a table to sit at. Soo-min, carrying a heaping plate of rice, pretended to look around for a table. Ji-won silently counted down the seconds, preparing for the moment when Soo-min would spill the soup all over her. She noticed Soo-min smiling mischievously. Then, Soo-min suddenly turned around, pretending to smile at Ji-won, intending to dump the entire bowl of soup all over her. Ji-won had anticipated this, so she swiftly dodged to the side. As everyone could see, Park Min-ju, standing behind, caught the full brunt of the food that Soo-min intended for Ji-won. He turned pale, speechless. Soo-min babbled apologies, confused about why he was standing there. She was in a panic, unsure of what to do. Park Min-hwan forced a smile and said it was fine. Thankfully, the soup wasn't too hot. But deep down, he was lamenting the loss of his shirt, worth over 1,000,000 won, trying not to lose his cool because it was Soo-min. On the flip side, Soo-min was asked if she got burned. She said she was fine, claiming she didn't see Ji-won, and that's why she turned back and accidentally spilled the soup all over him. Ji-won stood to the side, watching the two people checking on each other with a frosty expression. She told Soo-min to stop lingering around and hurry up to grab some tissues. Surprised, Soo-min pointed at herself and asked if she really had to go get them. Ji-won casually remarked, "You spilled it all over him, so if it wasn't you, then who else could it be?" She then set the tray down on the table and turned around to go grab something. Ji-won turned to ask if Park Min-hwan was okay, pretending to lament that this was his favorite shirt, making sure Soo-min, who was walking ahead, could hear. "This is the very shirt I gifted him on our 1-year anniversary." Soo-min stormed off with a twisted expression, fuming as she grabbed a tissue. When she brought the tissue back, Park Min-hwan was nowhere to be found. Ji-won simply mentioned that he had gone to the restroom. "You should just chill and sit tight while I go wash my hands." As Ji-won was washing her hands, you could hear someone calling from the next room. Ji-won paused for a moment, then turned back to ask if the person calling her was indeed talking to her. The person inside confirmed, saying they wanted to ask her for a favor. Ji-won instantly understood what the person was craving. She quickly reassured them, saying she would be right there with it in a moment. The people inside buzzed with gratitude for her. Later, Ji-won brought some goodies to the girl inside the room, making sure to bring an extra shirt to avoid any awkward moments. The girl could only express her heartfelt gratitude to Ji-won, feeling lucky to have her by her side. Without her, she wouldn't have known what to do. When she opened the door and saw Ji-won, the girl genuinely brightened, showering her with endless thanks. The girl, whose phone had died and who hadn't eaten yet, explained that the place felt like a ghost town and she was worried about getting stuck, which was giving her serious anxiety. It turned out the girl was Hyeni, who had started working with Young-soo a month ago. Hyeni was still smiling and thanking Ji-won profusely, mentioning that there were people who came before, but when she asked for help, they all just ghosted her. Ji-won asked if Hyeni wanted to grab a bite together, since she hadn't eaten yet. Hyeni's eyes sparkled with excitement as she instantly agreed. The two of them chatted away as they made their way back to the cafeteria. Meanwhile, Soo-min was having a lively chat with Park Man-hwan about how she's always ready to lend a helping hand. She mentioned that since childhood she's been super busy worrying about Ji-won. She also added that Ji-won wasn't really a social butterfly back in school, just to fill him in. Park Man-hwan praised her, saying she truly is a good person. Soo-min, trying to reclaim her image in front of Park Man-won, suddenly recalled that 10 minutes ago she had gone to the restroom to grab some tissues for him. She yanked the paper angrily, feeling humiliated by Ji-won, who had just been staring at her, making her look like a complete fool. If it were before, Ji-won would have automatically brought tissues, so why had she suddenly been acting so differently lately? Just then, someone knocked on the door, calling out to see who was outside, hoping to get her assistance. Ji-won, already fuming from the earlier incident, felt her face scrunch up in annoyance. She ignored the question and dramatically swung the door open, stepping outside. Right now, it felt like they were bringing up the time she helped someone stuck in the bathroom to win Park Man-hwan's favor. Just when the fun was getting started, Ji-won made her comeback. Next to her was Hyeen, carrying a plate of food. Ji-won smiled at Soo-min and asked what they were chatting about. Soo-min was flustered when she saw Hyeen arrive. Hyeen cheerfully greeted her and Park Man-hwan, and everyone was on board with having another person join the group. Ji-won cheerfully invited Hyeen to take a seat across from her, and Hyeen happily agreed, wishing everyone a delicious meal. Soo-min felt uneasy. Why was Hyeen so confident when they were the same age? Was it just because of her face? Park Man-hwan sat next to them and asked how Ji-won and Hyeen had suddenly become so close without him even knowing. Hyeen cheerfully mentioned that Ji-won had just helped her out with a few things. Then she noticed his shirt was stained and asked if he was okay, since it looked quite pricey. Park Man-hwan just smiled and said it was no big deal, just a shirt after all. Ji-won, gripping her chopsticks tightly, listened. The gift she had given him, and he treated it so lightly. Soo-min quickly changed the topic, saying that Hyeen must be really hungry, wondering how a girl could possibly eat that much. But Hyeen didn't care. She just thought that if she wanted to achieve something big, whether she was a girl or a boy, she had to eat a lot, just like her grandfather said. Soo-min pretended to laugh and said, "Your grandfather must have done something really grand, huh?" However, Hyeen seemed oblivious to the jab, munching away while sharing stories about her grandfather selling bean sprouts, tofu, and even kimchi soup. Soo-min looked down on her, realizing it was just selling side dishes. Ji-won on the side was surprised, wondering if Hyeen was genuinely kind or just clueless. After everyone finished eating, Park Man-won said he had to leave early, and Ji-won mentioned she would go grab some coffee, asking the two if they wanted anything. Hyeen immediately offered to go by herself. Ji-won declined, suggesting they could go together another time, saying she couldn't let a junior treat her since she was a senior. Soo-min then linked arms with Ji-won, asking her to get a hot cappuccino, acting all grateful. Ji-won swiftly shook her off and turned to Hyeen, asking what she wanted to drink. Hyeen smiled and said she wanted an iced Americano, promising to treat Ji-won next time. Ji-won smiled back and told them to go ahead. She would catch up later, then turned and walked away coldly. Soo-min awkwardly waved goodbye to Ji-won, then turned to Hyeen, pointing at the jacket she was wearing and asking if it belonged to Ji-won. "When did you get so close to Ji-won? You two have never even talked at the company, but here you are together at the cafeteria. It's quite surprising." Hyeen, pressing the elevator button, explained that she had just happened to get stuck in the restroom, and Ji-won helped her out. She even lent her a jacket, which was enough for Ji-won to be her savior. Soo-min was taken aback, realizing that the person stuck in the restroom earlier was Hyeen. She worried whether Hyeen recognized her voice from before. She covered her mouth and laughed, saying Ji-won just liked to meddle in other people's business. "She only does that for strangers," she warned Hyeen, not to trust Ji-won too much since she had known her for a long time. "I'm just looking out for you," she added. Hyeen, coldly remarking, said, "Actually, it's you who's meddling in other people's affairs. If you like to meddle so much, why didn't you speak up earlier and say you didn't want to help someone stuck?" Hyeen stepped into the elevator, completely ignoring Soo-min's stiff expression. She pressed the close button and casually asked, "Aren't you coming in?" And, just like that, she went up. Soo-min stood frozen in place, panic gripping her as she realized Hyeen had recognized her voice and all the lies she had spun. If those rumors spread throughout the company, what would she do? Suddenly, the voice of manager Kim rang out from behind, asking Soo-min what she was doing standing there. She quickly hatched a plan to use him to get Hyeen out of the company before her secrets were exposed. Soo-min tossed her hair, smiling at the manager and complimenting his beautiful tie. He chuckled and said he would only wear that tie to work, praising her for making the company feel more vibrant. He rambled on about how the female employees in the office were quite dull, while Soo-min was not only beautiful but also feminine. Soo-min giggled, saying she had been feeling a bit tired lately, but his words were like a boost of energy for her. Hearing this, he became flustered, worried about what was bothering Soo-min, and assured her he would help her sort it out. Soo-min pretended everything was fine, deliberately trying to elicit his sympathy. She sidled closer to manager Kim, whispering in his ear and asking if he would like to go out for drinks after work to chat with her. Meanwhile, Ji-won was ordering drinks at the cafe, and while waiting for her order, she suddenly remembered that the manager hadn't gone out for lunch, so she ordered some snacks for him as well. She thought about how the future had changed, with Park Man-won selling off all his most valuable shares, and how Jo Soo-min had spilled soup on his shirt instead of Ji-won's. It meant she could snatch away someone else's luck. Ji-won smiled softly, imagining that assumptions could become reality, and reality would inevitably become the norm. If one could foresee the future, would that create a better world than before? In this life, she was determined not to let anyone take away anything that belonged to her. After grabbing her coffee, Ji-won headed back to her office, surprised to find no one had left yet. She glanced over at manager Kim's desk, taking soft steps closer to him. There he was, peacefully napping in his chair. Ji-won wondered if he used to sleep this much too. As she spoke, she placed the cereal cup she'd bought for him on the table, softly urging him to drink it. He had looked perfectly fine in the morning, but now he seemed really exhausted. Suddenly, a hand grabbed hers. It turned out to be Park Man-hwan, furious and glaring as he pulled her along with him. Ji-won was taken aback and yanked her hand away from him, shouting at him to let go. Then, a large hand grabbed Park Man-hwan's hand and yanked it away. It was none other than manager Jin-hook, who had woken up at some point and was now glaring at Park Man-hwan. Park Man-hwan stammered when he saw Ji-hook. Ji-won was also stunned to see him come to her aid. With a serious expression, Ji-hook asked Park Man-hwan what he was trying to do. After recovering from his shock, Park Man-hwan retorted that he wasn't doing anything. He just wanted to have a private chat with Ji-won. Ji-hook wasn't backing down, though. He stated that even though it was lunchtime, this place still belonged to the company, and if there were private matters to discuss, they could wait until after work. The two exchanged heated words, sparks flying in the air, while Ji-won just gazed in disbelief. Jin-hook then turned, grabbed the cup of water she'd left on the table, thanked her for the drink and walked away. Ji-won stood there, deep in thought, wondering why the manager had helped her. Maybe he was just annoyed that someone had disturbed him while he was sleeping. Suddenly she turned around and found Park Man-hwan gritting his teeth, glaring at her. He mumbled that they would talk after work. Ji-won shivered, feeling scared at his expression. It reminded her of the time he had yelled at her when she suggested a divorce. He had said her existence made his life miserable and that marrying her was just out of pity. How dare someone like her suggest a divorce? He had said it with a fierce demeanor, and thinking about it now made her tremble all over. Suddenly, someone placed a hand on her shoulder from behind. Thankfully, it was Assistant Jang. She smiled and asked Ji-won if they could talk for a moment. Assistant Jang brewed her a cup of peppermint tea to help her unwind and kindly asked if something was bothering Ji-won. Earlier, she had noticed that Ji-won's face looked pale. Ji-won simply replied that it might be due to overworking herself. Assistant Jang chuckled, saying it was because Ji-won worked too hard. She suggested Ji-won take a break now and then, just like she had prioritized her own health after having her baby. Ji-won suddenly remembered that Assistant Jang had returned to work not long after her maternity leave, but soon resigned. Worried, she asked if Jang was doing okay these days. Jang replied that she was fine, though a bit anxious because team leader Kim wouldn't leave her alone. He used the excuse that he had to endure hardships while she was on leave, so now he treated her like a workhorse. She added that she was lucky to have talented colleagues like Ji-won, which allowed her to learn a lot. Then, playfully, she told Ji-won not to suffer in silence. Whenever she felt tired, she should just let Jang know because they were colleagues. At that moment, she brewed Ji-won another warm cup of tea. Ji-won held the cup tightly, bowing her head shyly as she thanked Jang, wondering why she hadn't realized 10 years ago what a wonderful colleague had been by her side all along. After finishing their tea, they headed back to the office and ran into Hyeen. She was still smiling and thanked Ji-won for buying her coffee. Assistant Jang also asked how Hyeen was doing with her internship. Hyeen cheerfully replied that everything was going great, with plenty of seniors offering help. Then she turned to ask about Assistant Jang's child, wondering if she had grown a lot by now. Assistant Jang happily showed them pictures of her daughter, and the three of them chatted animatedly, though Assistant Jang still felt sad about having to send her little one away while she was still so young. She knew she had to work hard to provide for her child. While the three of them were engrossed in looking at pictures of Jang's daughter, Soo-min and team leader Kim returned to the office. Ji-won and the others noticed them immediately, and the atmosphere shifted. People quickly scattered to their tasks. Even as Soo-min returned to her desk, she wondered what everyone had been huddling together about, laughing so much. Could they have been talking about her? She glanced at Ji-won, frowning, thinking to herself, no way, could she really be chatting and laughing with someone else like that? How could that even be possible? Before long, it was time to clock out. The manager stood up and said everyone had worked hard, so they should finish up their tasks and log off. People got up, tidied their things, and exchanged goodbyes, promising to see each other tomorrow. Ji-won anxiously left her desk, worried whether Park Man-hun was following her. Manager Hyuk quietly watched her retreating figure from behind. Ji-won entered the restroom and nervously checked her phone for the message Jo Soo-min had just sent her. It mentioned she had something to take care of and left early. Scrolling down, Ji-won saw a message from Park Man-hwan saying he was waiting for her at the company entrance and to call him when she came out. She had been in there for 20 minutes. He must have left by now, right? Ji-won tried to calm herself, telling herself not to be scared anymore. After all, she wasn't the gullible girl she used to be. If she wanted to avoid another stroke of bad luck, she had to start by changing herself. As she stepped outside, she immediately ran into the manager. He wondered why she was just now finishing up. Ji-won was surprised he hadn't left yet either. He simply replied that he had some business in the management department, which was why he was still there. The conversation ended, and Ji-won pressed the elevator button. The doors opened, and the two of them stepped inside in silence. Ji-won was still very anxious. What if Park Man-hwan was still waiting for her? She absolutely did not want to run into him. Meanwhile, Jun-hyuk suddenly spoke up, saying if it was convenient, he could give her a ride home since they were leaving at the same time. Once they reached the car, Jun-hyuk asked where she lived. Jin-won couldn't bring herself to look at him, replying that her place was in a quieter area, but he could just drop her off nearby. As Jin-won fumbled around, she noticed a designer lipstick by the car door. So, the manager had a girlfriend already. Actually, that wasn't too surprising. As the car approached the checkpoint to exit, Ji-won spotted Park Man-hwan still waiting at the door for her. He was leaning against a car, staring intently at his phone. As the school van rolled by, he suddenly looked up, his curiosity piqued. Ji-won, tense in the car, raised her hand to shield her face, fearing he might catch a glimpse of her. The car glided smoothly past him. Ji-won was taken aback, then glanced at Jun-hyuk, who noticed how she kept covering her face with her hands. She softly replied with a thank you, her heart whispering a sigh of relief. That was close, she thought, feeling like she had almost been caught in a drama. Later, Jun-hyuk escorted her all the way home, stepping up to open the door for her. Goodbye, and see you tomorrow, superstar, he said. She shyly greeted him back before heading up to her room. Jun-hyuk stayed behind for a moment, watching her head to her room before getting into the car. He sat there quietly for a while, and when he saw her room light up, his phone rang. The call was from a girl, asking why he hadn't clocked out yet. She wondered what was going on, since he had been so distracted lately. He casually replied, "I can't make it today, so you'll have to handle things on your own." Without giving her a chance to react, he hung up. The car sat quietly, parked outside Ji-won's place. Meanwhile, Jo Soo-min was having a drink with the head of the team, Kim. Her expression was one of pure discontent, secretly blaming the cheap, cloying scent of his cologne that clung to her like an unwanted sidekick. While Ji-won was out on a date with that handsome guy in designer clothes, here she was, stuck sitting with this smelly old man. The head of the committee, blissfully unaware of her inner musings, finished his drink and began complimenting her, saying that sipping wine with a beauty like her was simply a match made in heaven. He suggested they grab drinks together more often. Jo Soo-min playfully covered her mouth while laughing at him, masking her true feelings. At that moment, he asked her if she had something on her mind, encouraging her to share her thoughts. She simply said it was a small complaint of hers, then grabbed the bottle of wine from the table. Seeing the head of the committee smile, she thought to herself, if we down a few more drinks, maybe he'll spill some juicy details. While pouring a generous glass of wine for him, she casually mentioned Hyeni and assistant Jan, deliberately implying that they weren't fond of her. She pretended to be a damsel in distress, claiming that they had no right to treat her this way. She said she wanted to snap back at them, but if she decided to quit, he shouldn't take it to heart. The head of the committee, hearing this, immediately blew a gasket. He snapped that Soo-min wasn't taking a break and that he would handle them himself. In the company, with the chairman, he couldn't do anything, but here, he was the number one. Soo-min smiled and thanked him, but she didn't forget to add a little fuel to the fire, saying she really wanted to get along with everyone, but that they were being too harsh on her. The head of the department comforted her, suggesting she drown her sorrows in some drinks tonight, and assured her he'd handle everything else. He then turned to cheerfully clink glasses with her. Soo-min took a sip of her drink and shot a glance at him. She secretly smiled to herself, thinking how foolish and easily manipulated he was. Now, all she had to do was sit back and enjoy the show. Meanwhile, at home, Ji-won had just finished her shower, towel in hand while scrolling through her phone. On her screen was a message from Soo-min, pretending to care, asking why Ji-won had turned off her phone. She even mentioned how Ji-won had been making her sad lately, but that she still cherished her, wishing her a good night and saying they'd meet again tomorrow. Then came the missed calls from Park Man-hwan, who was really starting to get on her nerves. Just as Ji-won was about to change her number, her phone rang again. Park Man-hwan was calling. Reluctantly, Ji-won answered. The first thing he asked was where she was. She replied calmly that she was at home and asked if he needed something. Park Man-hwan sounded shocked and incredulous, asking when she had gotten home. He insisted he would come over to talk, but Ji-won declined, saying they could talk over the phone. She was really tired. After a pause, he asked why she had bought coffee for Jin-hook today, something she never did. She explained that Jin-hook had bought her coffee in the morning, so she was just returning the favor. Park Man-hwan still wouldn't let it go, questioning why Jin-hwa would buy her coffee in the first place. Ji-won tightened her grip on the towel and countered, asking if he would drink coffee alone if they were the only two in the office. He was left speechless and quickly changed the subject to why she had turned off her phone. She frowned and simply explained that it was because he had been angry with her and she felt hurt, so she turned it off. If there was nothing else, she said, she was going to sleep. Park Man-hwan then told her to go ahead and sleep, wishing her good night and saying he loved her. Ji-won, hearing that, got furious and threw her phone onto the couch. Exhausted, she slumped into the chair, angry and deep in thought. Both of them claimed to love her, but was there ever a moment when it was genuine? 10 years ago, she had good friends by her side, but perhaps she was afraid that her own misfortune would be discovered by everyone, so she couldn't face those around her. There had been worried glances directed at her before. She suddenly remembered Assistant J. The image of the head of the department scolding her flashed in her mind, throwing documents at her. She recalled how she could only cry silently by herself. Ji-won jolted up in shock. She remembered that in the past she had ignored her own suffering. At that moment, Assistant Jang had just returned home. As she opened the door, her daughter ran up to her with a bright smile, calling out, "Mom!" Assistant Jang sank down to embrace her daughter, who must have been waiting for her for a long time. Her husband was sitting on the sofa, remote in hand, grumbling about why she was home so late. He was starving. Assistant Zhang hugged her daughter and told her husband to stop watching TV and go to the kitchen to make something to eat instead of starving. She urged him to bathe their daughter while she whipped up something to eat right away. He turned off the TV, put his hands in his pockets, and said he had plans. He had to go out. "You just eat and bathe her," he said. Assistant Zhang asked why he was out so much. Didn't he see how hard she was working overtime? He walked out the door, putting on his shoes, and said he had been taking care of their daughter all day and was exhausted from submitting job applications. Hearing this, she got angry. "You left her like this? Her hair is still in the braid I did for her this morning, and her diaper hasn't even been changed." Her husband snapped back, telling her to stop nagging. "It's because of you that I have to go out." Assistant Zhang was frustrated. She still wanted him to stay home and bathe their daughter, but he just slammed the door behind him and left without looking back, leaving her alone with her daughter, speechless. Ever since she got pregnant, he had used the excuse of a year's salary to quit his job halfway through. Now, he didn't even want to come home anymore. Was he the only one who knew what exhaustion felt like? She was also very tired, dealing with the head of the department's constant nagging while trying to manage the mess of her daughter's food on the table. She still hadn't finished her work. Balancing her daughter on her back while trying to get things done, she was determined to do a great job on this project so that the head of the department wouldn't pick on her anymore. Suddenly, her daughter, who had been sleeping on her back, started to cry. Assistant Zhang turned her head to look at the little one and comfort her. It was already 3 a.m., and she had gotten so caught up in her work that she lost track of time. Putting her work aside, she laid her daughter down on the mattress and told her fairy tales to soothe her back to sleep. Suddenly, she reminisces about how, as a child, she wished her life would be just like a fairy tale. Sleepiness hits her like a wave, making her drowsy. She stretches, yawns, and decides to just close her eyes for a moment. Without much thought, she lies down next to her daughter and shuts her eyes. But just as she drifts into slumber, her nose starts bleeding unexpectedly, and she's completely oblivious to it. The next morning at the office, team leader Kim starts yelling at Assistant Zhang. He criticizes her project, tossing the proposal right at her, saying her skills are worse than an intern's. With a fierce expression, he berates her, asking if being at home with her child has drained her creativity. Assistant Zhang bows her head, hoping team leader Kim will point out what she's done wrong, but he just angrily jabs a finger at her, questioning if he really has to spell it out for her. After years in the company, she can't even produce a decent proposal. Assistant Zhang squats down to pick up the papers he threw on the floor, apologizing and promising to fix it and submit it again. Team leader Kim isn't letting up. He's still furious, ordering her to start over and have it ready by tomorrow morning. Ji-won sits at her desk, frowning and feeling annoyed, watching team leader Kim take advantage of his position to yell at employees when the department head isn't around. She turns to Jo Sumen's desk, where Sumen is smiling happily, looking quite pleased with herself. Meanwhile, Assistant Zhang is still bowing and apologizing to team leader Kim, promising to redo the project and submit it on time. He's still not calmed down, waving her back to her desk. Finally, Assistant Zhang returns to her workspace. As she passes Ji-won's desk, she looks at her with concern, worried since Ji-won has been working overtime for days. She wonders if she's okay. Ji-won follows her outside, calling out to her with care. But when Assistant Zhang turns around, she sees Ji-won with a nosebleed, trying to hide her distress. She asks if Ji-won wants some coffee. Just as she's about to brew some, Ji-won quietly thinks to herself that she's been working too hard these past few days, but she smiles and offers to make the coffee, since Assistant Zhang had made it for her last time. Ji-won is genuinely worried, wondering if changing someone else's fate would have consequences. After all, she had died once and come back to life, so whatever happens, happens. Only she knew the rules of this world. If something that had never happened in the past occurs, it would change something in the future. Suddenly, Jae-um reminded Assistant Zhang about the project she was working on, and insisted that she absolutely should not redo it. Instead, Jae-won suggested that she follow her lead and create a new project. Jae-won explained that it wasn't about changing the content of the project, but just altering the font and layout enough to submit it again. She believed that Chief Kim hadn't thoroughly read the content of Assistant Jang's project. He was simply looking for an excuse to criticize her. Assistant Jang hesitated a bit. Submitting an identical version felt a little off, but Ji-won urged her to trust her just this once. With a bright smile, Ji-won added that if Chief Kim complained about the project being the same, she would redo it, and of course submit it under Assistant Jang's name. Assistant Jang thought to herself, "Is Ji-won really like this?" She reluctantly agreed, saying that if the chief found out, they could just say it was a mix-up. Then Ji-won slipped something into her hand. Assistant Jang asked if it was related to the project. Ji-won replied that it wasn't. It was a voice recorder. Whenever Chief Kim scolded her, she should record it. Assistant Jang looked at the recorder. Even though Chief Kim often scolded her, he had worked hard during her maternity leave, so she felt she should have some conscience. Ji-won countered, "Who said Chief Kim worked hard while you were on leave?" She sighed, recalling that during Assistant Jang's maternity leave, she had to handle half of the workload, with the other half divided among the other staff members. She remembered the scene where Chief Kim angrily threw documents and made employees redo their work. He probably only worked hard throwing reports around, she thought. Ji-won reminded Assistant Jang to keep acting normal and to remember to record everything. It might come in handy in the future. After that, the two returned to the office. As soon as they opened the door, they saw Chief Kim yelling at Hye-in again. He was loudly pointing his finger at her, berating her, and she could only bow her head and accept the blame. According to Ji-won's memories, Hye-in would soon be transferring to another department. And, of course, the reason was Chief Kim. He only waited for moments when the department head was absent to act like he owned the place. Ji-won stared at Chief Kim, frowning and thinking, "Just wait and see." The one who wrote the proposal was not Assistant Jang, but it would be him. The next day, still using the excuse that the project was worthless, Chief Kim threw the proposal at Assistant Jang, shouting at her to start over from scratch. The following day was no different. He continued to nitpick Assistant Jang's proposal, saying she had all this time to work on it, and this was all she could come up with. 3 days later, without even looking at it, he tossed the proposal back, demanding a redo. Days passed, and the demand for a redo continued. A week later, this time Chief Kim pretended the proposal looked better and said he would let it pass. He told Assistant Jang to print it out and bring a copy to the meeting, while the original should be submitted to the department head. He reminded her that the promotion evaluation was coming up and that he wouldn't be so lenient next time, so she better get it right. Assistant Jang sighed and thanked him. She returned to her desk, thinking that he hadn't even read the proposal closely. She had only changed the font and layout, and he didn't even notice. Looking back at Ji-won behind her, who was giving her an okay sign, she smiled, realizing Ji-won was right. Suddenly, a notification pinged. It was Ji-won saying she would submit the proposal to the department head, while Assistant Jang should just print and distribute it to the other staff. Assistant Jang was surprised. Ji-won was going to submit it to the department head, and she was holding the original. But who knows, maybe Ji-won had her own plan. Meanwhile, after grabbing the prepared documents, Ji-won brought them to the department head's desk and handed them over, saying this was the proposal for today's meeting, approved by Chief Kim. The department head took it and told her to prepare for the meeting, adding that Hye-in had already gone to buy coffee, so there was no need to prepare anything else. Ji-won complied, but was curious about Hye-in buying coffee. Soon, the table was filled with Americanos that Hye-in had brought back. Everyone was grateful and praised Hye-in for being so thoughtful. Just as everyone was in high spirits, Hye-in smiled brightly and said, "It's nothing. The department head is treating you, not me spending my own money." Suddenly, Chief Kim's voice boomed, asking who had brought coffee to the company. Hearing this, Hye-in immediately said it was her who had bought it and cheerfully handed him a cup. He not only refused to take it, but also yelled at her for bragging to him. He shouted loudly, criticizing the coffee she bought as overpriced and mediocre in taste. Who drinks coffee before a morning meeting anyway? There's plenty of coffee piled up in the break room. How dare a contract employee use the company card so recklessly like that? Little did he know, manager Jean-Hook had been standing behind him the whole time, his brow furrowed. He informed the man that it was he who had given the company card to Hyene to buy the coffee. The man was taken aback, stammering that he had also intended to use the company card to buy coffee. Jean-Hook coolly replied that it was his card, and since he didn't like instant coffee, he had asked Hyene to go get some. Ji-won and Soo-min, standing nearby, were astonished. Ha-jung had used the manager's personal card to buy coffee. No one had ever done that before. Soo-min, with a displeased expression, turned away to another spot. After that, the meeting commenced, with Jin-hook sitting at the head. He asked if the project was from Assistant Jang. Assistant Jang held the project proposal and began to present her work. Everyone focused on the copies in their hands, listening intently to her presentation. Suddenly, Jin Ye-hook interrupted the presentation. He flipped through the proposal he was holding and pointed out that it didn't match what Assistant Jang was presenting. Seeing this, Chief Kim got furious and scolded Assistant Jang. He had told her to submit the original document to the manager, yet here they were with the wrong version. She hesitantly apologized for submitting the wrong proposal that Chief Kim had returned. Chief Kim turned pale and handed Jung-hook his copy of the proposal to review, not forgetting to scold Assistant Jang a few more times. Jun-hook took the document and began to examine the proposal. As if he had discovered something, he asked Assistant Jang if this was indeed the proposal that had been returned. She looked at the stack in her hands and confirmed it was. Jung-hook then turned to Chief Kim and asked why he had returned the first proposal. The man fumbled, trying to cover up by saying the proposal wasn't clear enough. Assistant Jung had hastily patched together some content from the internet and submitted it to him, which is why he had returned it. He then pretended to shake his head, claiming that since this time it was done well, he was approving it today. Jin-hook coldly asked how many times the proposal had been returned. He then tossed the proposal onto the table, telling him that both proposals only differed in structure, the content was identical. In the end, what had he read that made him return it and then approve it? Chief Kim looked as pale as a ghost and turned to scold Assistant Jang for daring to play him. Assistant Jang stammered, but Ji-won stood up and apologized. She explained that the first proposal had been written by Assistant Jang, while the one submitted was her own. Jin-hook questioned her, asking what she meant by that. Ji-won bowed her head and explained that she had seen Assistant Jang unwell earlier and had helped her out. She thought the proposal she received was just a reference document, so she based her submission on that. Since Assistant Jang didn't have time to redo it, she submitted that version to the department head. Ji-won bowed, taking responsibility in front of the department head, admitting that submitting the wrong proposal was her fault. Ji-won sincerely apologized. Department head Kim, seeing this, pointed at her and scolded her, questioning if she was even aware of what she was doing. Mistakes could happen, but how could she mix this up? If she knew it was a mistake, she should have asked for an extension to write a new one. Department head Jin-hook adjusted his glasses, frowned, and shot a glare at department head Kim, asking if he was trying to pin the blame on someone else. Suddenly, the fierce reprimand from earlier vanished, replaced by a stiffened posture as Kim stammered that he might have been tired and confused. Jin-hook tapped the proposal folder and echoed the question that Kim had just asked Ji-won. How could this be mixed up? He stood up and met the gaze of the bowing man, promising that this would never happen again. Jin-hook looked at him with a cold, wolf-like glare and told him he didn't need to apologize to him. Instead, he should prepare a written self-reflection for him by tomorrow. At that moment, department head Kim trembled in fear at Jin-hook's intensity, unable to utter a word. Ji-won, seeing this, brought the new proposal folder to Jin-hook. He accepted it and addressed everyone. For future proposals, they should skip the first confirmation and bring them directly to him for review. The meeting continued, and everyone in the room had their own expressions. Ji-won and Assistant Jang smiled cheerfully, while Department Head Kim looked both anxious and furious. Meanwhile, Jo Soo-men bit her lip in annoyance. The meeting wrapped up, and everyone filed out of the conference room to return to their desks. Ji-won let out a sigh. She had been really scared, but thankfully she had managed to resolve the situation smoothly. She hoped Assistant Jang wouldn't be asking for leave anymore. A message came in for her. It was from Assistant Jang, thanking her for the help. She said that from now on she would be less harassed. Another message popped up and Ji-won clicked to open it. It turned out to be from Jo Soo-men, reminding her not to forget their appointment this weekend. Ji-won thought to herself, did she have any plans with her this weekend? Either way, she wasn't going to go. She glanced at her calendar. Her mouth suddenly froze mid-drag. Gwan's face went pale all of a sudden. Wasn't this weekend the day of their class reunion from years ago? She really just wanted to erase all memories of that day. Back then, young Soo-men had promised to take her to a famous restaurant, but unexpectedly she led her to the reunion instead. As soon as her old classmates saw her, they looked down on her and whispered about her, assuming she must have begged Jo Soo-min to take her along. No one there welcomed her. Ji-won stood frozen, unable to say a word while they continued to gossip. Jo Soo-min smiled, linked arms with Ji-won and introduced her as her best friend. So, of course, she was there. Ji-won, feeling shy, excused herself to the restroom, but in there they were still talking about her. They even thought Soo-min was too kind-hearted and had suffered a lot because of her, yet still took care of her. In their eyes, Soo-min was such a sweet girl, always having to put up with Ji-won. Ji-won sat in the restroom, feeling despondent and stunned by their words. They even thought she was a bad friend. While they were chatting, one friend suddenly remembered seeing Ji-won go into the restroom and hurried outside. Inside, Ji-won burst into tears, memories flooding back. She recalled locking herself in the restroom for 30 minutes, and when she finally came out, there was no one left, not even Soo-min. Lost in her thoughts, Ji-won... Suddenly, she heard someone call her name. Turning around in shock, Ji-won recognized it was Assistant Un-ho, Hye-in, Ji-won's assistant. Hye-in called her name, jolting her back to the present. Hye-in asked what was wrong and why she was so deep in thought in the restroom. Ji-won awkwardly replied that she was thinking about work. Hye-in joked that she was like a busy bee and advised her to relax her mind for a bit. Then Hye-in asked if Ji-won had any plans for Sunday, as she wanted to invite her to hang out at Gajosue. Ji-won remembered she had a date with Soo-in on Sunday, so she told Hye-in she was already booked for that evening. Hye-in felt a bit down upon hearing Ji-won's response, but then suggested rescheduling for the morning instead. Ji-won happily agreed, and both of them were excitedly looking forward to their Sunday morning date. Hye-in was thrilled and told Ji-won to hang tight because they were about to plan an epic adventure. But suddenly, Ji-won realized the lipstick Hye-in was wearing. It was the same lipstick she had spotted in manager Jin-hook's car. Ji-won's mind raced as she recalled a rumor circulating in the company. Hye-in and manager Jin-hook were dating. Perhaps the rumors were actually true. In Ji-won's eyes, manager Jin-hook was a cold, distant figure, while Hye-in was outgoing, vibrant and friendly. Ji-won wondered how two people with such contrasting personalities, like fire and water, could possibly be a couple. She speculated that perhaps Hye-in's lively and energetic nature was what led her to agree to date someone like Jin-hook. Meanwhile, Hye-in was buzzing with excitement about her Sunday date with Ji-won. The two of them exited the restroom together, and as they walked, Hye-in couldn't stop introducing Ji-won to the stations. Ji-won confessed she had never been to the area before, and with a cheerful and confident vibe, Hye-in told Ji-won that she was a regular at a few spas in the area and knew quite a bit about them. Jin-hook had just stepped out of his office and overheard their conversation. He asked where they were planning to go this Sunday morning. Ji-won was about to respond when Hye-in swooped in, completely dodging Jin-hook's question, and whisked Ji-won away in a flash. Ji-won hesitated, glancing back at the manager, thinking to herself, can I really just walk away like this? If she did, the rumors about manager Jin-hook and Hye-in dating would definitely be true. That's why Hye-in had been acting like that just now. Early Sunday morning, Ji-won got a call from the Seoul eye care shop. They informed her that her ordered contact lenses had arrived and invited her to come pick them up. This time, Ji-won decided to reinvent herself and show up to the class reunion looking completely different. It was Ji-won's first time trying contact lenses, and she wasn't sure if it would hurt. She squeezed her eyes shut, and wow! Putting in contact lenses for the first time was definitely no walk in the park. All set, Ji-won hopped into a ride to Geo City Station. At the shopping mall, Ji-won noticed that Hyeen had been waiting for her for quite a while. Hyeen was utterly amazed by Ji-won's stunning new look. Ji-won felt a bit embarrassed by Hyeen's exaggerated expression and told her that it was her first time wearing contact lenses. Hyeen was very excited because she thought Ji-won looked beautiful wearing them. Hyeen firmly believed that even Kim Tae looked better in contact lenses than in frames. Suddenly, Ji-won remembered something and changed the subject. She turned to Hyeen and casually said that she had seen manager Jong-hook wearing contact lenses, and he looked way more handsome. Hyeen was taken aback, her face lighting up as she realized Ji-won was casually bringing up the manager right in front of her. Ji-won secretly thought that maybe Hyeen wasn't a fan of others praising her boyfriend. Hyeen didn't deny it. She skillfully dodged Ji-won's comment and switched the conversation to their plans for today's outing. Ji-won was surprised. There was actually a whole plan in place. The first stop Hyeen took Ji-won to was a hair salon. Hyeen introduced her boss, someone she really admired, to the cafe owner. Ji-won, eager to reinvent herself, asked the owner for advice on a hairstyle that would suit her. After a bit of admiration, the shop owner told Ji-won that she would rock a curly hairstyle under the magic touch of the cafe owner. Ji-won eagerly anticipated a totally transformed version of herself. First, the stylist trimmed Ji-won's hair a bit, and then continued to curl the ends. Finally, it was all about the glam. Ji-won became the boss lady and didn't forget to ask for the perfect hairstyling steps for her face shape. Finally, it was done. Hyeen was the first to rush over, roaring with excitement at Ji-won's transformation, while the owner beamed with pride and satisfaction over her masterpiece. But the most surprised of all was Ji-won. She almost didn't recognize herself in the mirror. Suddenly, the phone rang out like a dramatic plot twist. Sween called to remind Ji-won about their date tonight, and especially reminded her to wear the earrings she had gifted her. Of course, Ji-won knew those earrings didn't suit her at all, but she still agreed with Sween. Ji-won smiled as she thought about her original plan. She would have Sween marry Park Min-hanan in her place, next on the agenda. She invited Hyeen for a shopping spree. And of course, Hyeen happily agreed right away, as this was part of the fun outing she had been eagerly anticipating for the past few days. On Sunday night at the class reunion, everyone was thrilled to finally catch up after such a long time apart, and the atmosphere was buzzing with laughter and lively conversations. Suin couldn't help but bring up Ji-won during the chats, fully aware that everyone thought Ji-won was the reason behind her many embarrassing moments. Meanwhile, Suin played the noble card, totally unfazed by all that drama, while her classmates thought she was just being a total airhead. Some people were curious about what Ji-won was up to these days, but they couldn't resist throwing shade at her down-to-earth fashion choices. Suin continued to defend Ji-won in front of their friends, and also shared with everyone that Ji-won would be joining the event. Suin pulled out her phone to call Ji-won, but the real reason she wanted Ji-won to come to the class reunion was something only the two of them understood. Ji-won picked up the phone, and Swin eagerly asked where Ji-won was, offering to come pick her up. Ji-won coolly replied that there was no need, and quickly stepped inside, ready for the show to begin. Everyone present was left in awe. They were taken aback as Ji-won cheerfully waved hello to everyone. She was no longer the everyday plain Jane. She was completely transformed into a showstopper. It had been ages, and Sween was the most surprised one of all. Ji-won was totally in sync with Sween, casually asking her about their date while pretending to be completely clueless about the class reunion. Sween rushed over to Ji-won, introducing her to the whole class as her best friend. And the one who brought her along, the whole class was buzzing with whispers. A guy even jumped up in surprise upon seeing Ji-won transform into a stunning beauty. But Ji-won didn't recognize him. She asked who he was, and he clearly answered, "Me, Kim Tae-song." Ji-won recalled that he was the one who teased her all the time back then. He noticed that Ji-won and Soo-in were wearing matching earrings, and couldn't help but emphasize how perfectly they suited Ji-won, while Soo-in looked like she had borrowed her mum's pair. Tong even asked Ji-won for her phone number and casually inquired if she had a boyfriend yet. Ji-won glanced at Swin, who was biting her lip in silence. The classmates were buzzing about Tong's actions, claiming he had no conscience. Ji-won got up and headed to the restroom, where the whole class was whispering and gossiping about Ji-won's transformation, even comparing Swin's look to something straight out of a fashion faux pas. Soo-in was fuming over the gossip, completely baffled by the situation unfolding around her. Everything was spiraling out of control, far from what she had anticipated. In the restroom, Ji-won slipped in because she found the class reunion utterly boring. She opened the door to the third bathroom, pondering as she gazed inside, vividly recalling the memories from this day 10 years ago. Soo-in, someone she once considered a close friend, had always been spreading rumors and bad-mouthing her. She couldn't understand why Swin's friends hated her so much. Remembering the story she had heard while sitting in the bathroom 10 years ago, she finally understood the real reason behind Swin's actions. This was precisely why she was revisiting that dreadful memory once again. Ji-won gritted her teeth. Even now, she couldn't believe it. Suddenly, a notification pinged on her phone. It was her manager, Jean Huck, texting to ask what she was up to. She replied that she was at a class reunion, unsure if there was an urgent matter since it was the weekend. She snapped her phone shut and heard footsteps approaching. Still the same gossip about her. She had heard these words a decade ago, and she remembered every single one, as if etched in her mind. Their conversation played back in Ji-won's head like a tape rewind, but this time was different. She couldn't let herself run away like a fool anymore. She pushed the door open, surprising them all. Ji-won asked if they wanted to hear what she had done to Swin back in high school. Swin's friends were taken aback by Ji-won's sudden appearance, but they still defended Swin, claiming she was just pretending to be clueless. They asked if Ji-won remembered Baek and Hanan. Ji-won was equally shocked to hear them mention that name. It turned out it was because of him that her friends criticized her for liking Baek and Hanan, which supposedly prevented Swin from confessing to him, but she knew that wasn't the truth. She had always thought that Baek and Hanan had a crush on Swin throughout their 3 years of high school. Back then, Ji-won received a love letter, but Swin told her that Baek and Hanan had confessed to her, even claiming she had no feelings for him. So Ji-won assumed that the letter was meant for Swin, only to realize now that it was actually for her. She didn't deny that she liked Baek and Hanan, but she had no idea that Swin liked him too. Yet those friends continued to defend Swin, even suggesting that Swin's failure to get into college was Ji-won's fault. They demanded that Ji-won leave Swin alone, especially since Swin was about to work at the same company as Ji-won. Hearing this, Ji-won could no longer hold back. She pulled out her business card and told them that Swin got hired as a contract employee because she had referred her. All of Ji-won's friends were skeptical about what she was saying. They snatched the business card from Ji-won's hand, and after reading the information on it, they realized Ji-won was right. She emphasized that, as a contract employee, Soo-in was super busy and had no time for beauty care. She even sarcastically remarked that the handbag her friend Ji-won was using was a knockoff. Hearing Ji-won say that, the whole group panicked. They demanded she apologize immediately, but they had no idea that Ji-won had changed. She knew the whole truth now. She had come back to get revenge on all of them. The ones who should be apologizing were them, not her. Throughout their high school years, they had blindly followed Swin in bullying her without checking if it was right or wrong. The group fell silent because the truth was undeniable. Ji-won asserted that if they saw the receipt for the handbag from the mall, she would apologize for calling it a knockoff. However, the more they heard, the angrier they got. Ji-won pointed out that while they were feeling wronged, she had felt the same way all those years. Ji-won told them that if they didn't believe her, they could go ask Swin. Then she turned and walked away with a fierce attitude, hoping she would never have to cross paths with them again. As she quickly exited the restroom, Ji-won couldn't shake off her disappointment in someone she once considered a close friend. It turned out Soo-in had always been slandering her. Remembering her high school days, Ji-won was sure that her isolation was also due to Sween, and today she finally understood the reason. The sound of Suin calling her snapped her out of her thoughts. Suin asked what she was doing standing there, and Ji-won gave a half-hearted answer. Suin was curious about what Ji-won and her friends had been talking about. Ji-won didn't beat around the bush. She recalled Park and Hwan, the most admired student council president in school, always surrounded by a dazzling aura. Ji-won was no exception. She had a crush on Park and Hwan. He was always gentle with her, making her feel warm and cherished, but he had responded to her confession with disdain. Not long after, he confessed to Suin. Well, that was all in the past now. Ji-won encouraged herself, thinking back. She realized she hadn't seen Park and Hwan at the class reunion, which she thought was for the best. Outside, Park and Hwan had just gotten out of the car and were calling a classmate to let them know he had arrived. Meanwhile, Ji-won was still reminiscing about the past with Park and Hwan, wondering if he was even more handsome than before. Park and Hwan was totally taken aback when his buddy announced that Ji-won was also coming and was looking absolutely stunning. He insisted that when Park and Hwan saw Ji-won, he'd be completely blown away because she was no longer that girl from back in the day who wore glasses. But in Ji-won's eyes, she had always been the beautiful girl. He never expected that they were just separated by a glass door. Ji-won, feeling down, was getting ready to leave. She tried to pep herself up and shake off the gloom, but the tears just kept flowing. The door swung open, and she dashed past Park and Hwan as he walked in. "Wait a sec." Park and Hwan, while on the phone, suddenly had a light bulb moment. He realized that the girl who had just zipped past him was none other than Ji-won. "Hey, Ji-won." Ji-won turned around and recognized Park and Hwan, her first love during her younger years. Park and Hwan happily gazed at Ji-won, instantly recognizing her. Finally, after searching for her for so long, he had found her. But as for Ji-won, upon seeing Park and Hwan, the part of her memory she least wanted to recall came rushing back. She turned and ran, wondering why on earth she had to bump into him at this very moment. But how could Park and Hwan let Ji-won walk away like that? He hurriedly chased after her, shouting loudly, "You're here to meet Ji-won. You just need to pause for a moment and chat with me inside the cafe." Sumin's friends were eagerly waiting for Ji-won to return and were furious when they heard Ji-won's words. They wanted to get the real scoop from Sumin. On Park and Hwan's side, he once again suggested having a quick chat with Ji-won, just for a moment. Ji-won stood still. Suddenly, a car screeched to a halt right in front of her. The person stepping out of the car was manager Jin-hook. Hearing his voice left Ji-won in shock, wondering what the department head was doing here. Park and Hwan shouted, insisting he wanted to talk to Ji-won. Ji-won frowned and tightly shut her eyes, unsure of what to do next. Clearly, in the past, Park and Hwan was the one who walked away first. He had said there was nothing left to discuss, so now, what did he even want to talk about with her? With that thought, Ji-won turned away, leaving Park and Hwan standing there. She hopped into the boss's car for her grand exit. She was done with this place. But Park and Hwan still wouldn't give up, shouting loudly that Ji-won absolutely had to check the messages on that forum. Ji-won suddenly recalled the forum. Since graduation, she hadn't logged in there anymore. Jin-hook drove off into the sunset, and Ji-won glanced in the mirror, noticing Park and Hwan still standing there. She wondered why she had said that to him. As for Jin-hook, he remained silent, stealing glances at Ji-won as they drove. Meanwhile, in the restroom, the conversation between Sumin and her friends was still going strong. They were asking Sumin if it was true that she was a contract employee, and if Ji-won had introduced her to the job, as she had claimed. Hearing this, Sumin turned pale, wanting to dodge the question, but her friends weren't letting her off the hook. They were furious for being played. Sumin explained that she had confused it with another company and hadn't meant to say that. As she spoke, she silently blamed Ji-won, thinking that everything happening was because of her. At that moment, her friends began to realize that everything Ji-won had said was true, including the fact that she couldn't confess to Park and Hwan because Ji-won hadn't either. Soo-min turned pale again, thinking Ji-won had lost her mind for bringing that up. Back then, they were all just kids, and she had forgotten about that incident. One friend angrily pushed Soo-min, accusing her of deceiving them to gain their sympathy all this time. Soo-min shoved the girl away, shouting that she wasn't lying. Nevertheless, Soo-min tried to explain that she had hidden the company details because she was worried Ji-won would get scolded by everyone. However, Soo-min's friends no longer believed her. They realized that it was Soo-min's lies that had caused Ji-won to be scolded. In a last-ditch effort, Soo-min turned the tables, accusing them of being the ones who had picked on Ji-won. She never wanted that. Why were they now turning against her? Feeling utterly disappointed in her friends, they had nothing left to say to Soo-min. They left, hoping that Soo-min would cut off contact with them in the future. As the restroom door closed, Soo-min felt as if she had lost everything. She trembled and sank to the floor. She didn't want this. She didn't want things to turn out this way. In the past, it was Ji-won who had been looked down upon and mocked, and Soo-min still couldn't accept what had happened today. Previously, Soo-min had always let everyone misunderstand Ji-won, while portraying herself as the noble one in everyone's eyes. She was the obedient and gentle one. Only by doing so could she receive love and affection from others. But now Ji-won had completely shattered that facade. Soo-min sat trembling in the bathroom, lost in thought for what felt like an eternity. By the time she calmed down, she had no idea how long she had been sitting there. Slowly she got to her feet, her legs numb from sitting for so long. She had no clue how to face everyone outside. She thought that if she just cried softly and spouted some nonsensical excuses, everyone would let it slide. But when she stepped into the dining room, the sight before her sent her into a panic. The room that had been bustling just moments ago was now completely empty. Meanwhile, Ji-won was sitting in the car with manager Jin-hook when her phone rang. Jin-hook glanced at Ji-won, noticing that after everything that had happened today, she was so exhausted that she had dozed off. He didn't want to wake her, but the phone rang again. In the past, the bullying had been absolutely outrageous. They even took pleasure in throwing trash at her. During those times, Soo-min was always the one to step in and protect her. Back then, Ji-won believed that Soo-min truly considered her a good friend, which is why she didn't want her to be hated by everyone else. Ji-won had once thought that everyone despised her, but everything changed when Park and Ho showed up. He came and sat next to her. Park and Ho insisted that sitting next to her would help him see the board better, so starting tomorrow he would sit there. With that, he flashed her a warm smile. Ji-won's feelings for him began to blossom from that day on. From then on, whenever Ji-won was bullied by her classmates, Park and Ho was the one who stood up for her. Ji-won couldn't understand why Park and Ho treated her so kindly. It all started when he told her to smile more, because she looked so much prettier when she did. After that, her classmates stopped throwing trash at her through the window. Her heart began to race every time she arrived at school, fueled by the positive encouragement from her friend, Soo-min, and the fluttering of her heart. Ji-won wrote a love letter to Park and Ho, and it was Soo-min who helped her slip that letter into In-ho's personal locker. But Ji-won completely forgot how she looked and the situation at that moment. That's why there was that conversation between her and In-ho. At the time, In-ho had said he had nothing more to say to her and turned to walk away, watching her letter crumple in his hand. That moment shattered her completely, and she sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Ji-won increasingly affirmed that aside from Soo-min, who cherished her, everyone else despised her. She was the girl who received no love and was neglected. At that moment, she had no idea that everything happening to her was intentionally caused by Soo-min, the person she considered her only friend. Soo-min had always been plotting behind her back. Memories of the past still made Ji-won cry unconsciously, and the painful past jolted her awake. It was then that Ji-won realized she had dozed off in Jin-hook's car. Looking at the jacket draped over her, she remembered she had fallen asleep in the manager's vehicle. Jin-hook, noticing she was awake, casually asked her a question. Ji-won hurriedly apologized and asked the manager what time it was. Jin-hook glanced at his watch and saw it was already 10. Ji-won couldn't believe she had slept for a full 3 hours. Feeling embarrassed, she thanked the manager and quickly opened the door to get out of the car. Suddenly, a hand grabbed hers, shutting the car door again. Jin-hook reached across her to grasp the door handle. At that moment, the distance between them was incredibly close. She had never been this near Jin-hook before, and her heart raced wildly. Jin-hook apologized to Ji-won for meddling, but he thought she wouldn't want to see Park and-wan right now. Hearing Jin-hook's words, Ji-won looked up and saw Park and-wan standing in front of her apartment building. She wondered why he was there. Unable to approach her, Park and-wan got back in his car and drove away. Watching his car leave, Jin-hook confirmed with Ji-won once more. Ji-won sighed in relief, realizing that the manager was quite perceptive, as he seemed to know she was avoiding Park and-wan. She thought to herself that she would have to move soon. She explained to Ji-hook that she and Min Hanan had a falling out over company matters, which was why things were like this. Remembering that the manager's hand was still on hers, Ji-won quickly pulled her hand away. Both of them felt awkward and shy as they looked at each other. The distance felt too close, and Ji-won hurriedly apologized. The manager calmly asked Ji-won if she loved Park and Hanan. Ji-won candidly admitted to Jin-hook that the truth was indeed so, as he was her boyfriend. However, she also told him that she felt uncomfortable answering such personal questions. As soon as she finished speaking, Ji-won suddenly felt flustered, thinking she had sounded too cold. Jin-hook apologized for making her uncomfortable, his words tinged with a hint of sulkiness. Ji-won bid farewell to Jin-hook, wanting to leave since it was getting late, but still wanting to express her gratitude. "Manager, thank you for all the help you've given me so far," she said, reminding him to drive safely. Jin-hook remained silent, not saying a word. Ji-won feared he was upset, so she thought to compliment him. She told Jin-hook that he looked much more handsome without his glasses. Hearing this, the corners of Jin-hook's mouth curled into a smile. He put on his glasses, not forgetting to tell Ji-won that she didn't look good in that outfit today. With that, he drove away. Ji-won didn't think much of it. She figured the manager was just like that. As she walked up to her house, she couldn't help but wonder if that outfit really was that bad. Jin-hook continued to watch Ji-won through the rearview mirror. His heart raced as he recalled the moment Ji-won smiled brightly at him. But he was puzzled as to why she had cried in the car earlier. Was it really because of some loser? Jin-hook had once accidentally overheard a conversation between Uncle Min-hoon and Soo-min. At that time, Uncle Min-hoon had praised Soo-min for being prettier and cuter than Ji-won. Jin-hook was furious, unable to understand why Ji-won would love someone like that. Did she really love him just because he was her boyfriend? Jin-hook dismissed that as a lie and drove straight home. On arriving home, Ji-won picked up her phone and saw a ton of missed calls from Soo-min. She felt sad and didn't even feel like calling back. She recalled Uncle Min-hoon's and Jin-hook's words from earlier and opened her blog to see why Uncle Min-hoon had been upset with her. What could a friendless person like her find interesting on a blog anyway? To her surprise, Ji-won found several messages, all from Uncle Min-hoon. He really wanted to get in touch with her and had even left his phone number for her to reach out. All these messages had been sent to her over time, and she had no idea. Even though he hadn't received a reply from her, he kept messaging. Ji-won didn't understand why he would do that. He even mentioned that he kept using that phone because of her. Suddenly, the phone on the table vibrated. It was a strange number calling. Ji-won answered, and it was Ji-won, a friend of Soo-min, calling. She was calling using the number on the business card Ji-won had given her. Ji-won asked what the call was about, wondering if they wanted to argue with her over the phone. But no, she called to apologize to Ji-won because of everything that had happened. They realized that because of them, Ji-won had to endure a lot of hardships. They had only listened to Soo-min and thought poorly of her, and they hoped she would forgive them. Ji-won's eyes welled up with tears as she heard those words. She candidly replied that even if she accepted their apology, she didn't have the courage to meet them again. However, she still thanked them for reaching out first, and she promised to try to be stronger. The 3 classmates thanked her for forgiving them, By the way, while talking, they reminded Jiwon that Andor wanted to get in touch with her. Jiwon had no idea that Andor was sitting with them at that moment. The next morning at the office, as Jiwon walked through the door, she ran into Hyen. Hyen asked, "Who picked out the shirt for you? It suits you perfectly." She also complimented the department head for looking really cool without his glasses, saying they looked like a couple straight out of a movie. Ji-hook felt embarrassed and asked Hyen to keep it down and focus on work. Just as Haini sat down at her desk, she saw Park Min-hwan and Soo-min approaching. Both of them were surprised when they looked at Ji-won. Min-hwan couldn't believe his eyes and instinctively smiled at Ji-won's transformation. She looked just like a famous actress. Soo-min, however, felt annoyed when she saw Min. Min-hwan rushed over to Ji-won, asking what had happened and why her style had changed so much. Soo-min looked at Ji-won without answering, only asking him if he thought it didn't suit her. When Min-won said it suited her very well, Soo-min angrily turned and walked away. Min-juan leaned closer to Ji-won, telling her that although she looked beautiful, she shouldn't dress like that at the office anymore. He was worried someone might be watching her. Min-juan was hinting at department head Jun-hook, who usually wore glasses and a tie, but today looked really cool. He thought Jun-hook was trying to charm Ji-won. Min-juan then turned to ask Ji-won out after work like usual. Ji-won declined, saying she already had plans after work. Later, Ji-won went to a nearby cafe. As she pushed the door open, she saw Uncle Min-ho had already arrived. He was waiting for her. Ji-won sat down across from Min-ho and hesitantly asked him why he had been sending her messages on the blog for years. Min-ho honestly replied that he had been in unrequited love with Ji-won throughout their 3 years in high school. Ji-won was taken aback, unable to believe what she was hearing. Min-ho knew that his misunderstanding had ruined everything, and he apologized for hurting Ji-won. Seeing Ji-won silent, Min-ho realized she had a boyfriend, and he wanted to meet her not to make things difficult, but simply to be friends again, occasionally checking in on each other's health, grabbing coffee, sharing meals, and chatting. If they were friends, that would be perfectly normal, right? Ji-won smiled and agreed with him. After rekindling their friendship, Ji-won learned the truth from that year. It turned out that Soo-min had intercepted the love letter Ji-won wrote, and Park Min-hwan had deeply liked her. Ji-won couldn't bring herself to tell him that, in fact, she had also liked him a lot. If that venomous Soo-min hadn't done what she did, maybe Ji-won would have been married to Park Min-hwan, the one she liked. She wondered if she would have been happy, or if he would have held her and cried for her. Suddenly, someone called her name. She felt tears welling up as she realized it was manager Jin-hook. Why did he always show up when she was feeling down? Curiously, she asked why he was there at this hour. The manager politely apologized for not informing her beforehand. He mentioned he had seen Park Min-hwan come by for a while before leaving. The manager reminded her to be careful. That's when Ji-won called out, "Manager, Jo Minan is my boyfriend and has nothing to do with you, so please don't wait outside my apartment because of this." The manager hesitated for a moment before replying, "Ji-won, the person you fear and want to avoid is also called your boyfriend. You see him every day. Don't you know why you endure and tolerate Soo-min's jealousy?" Ji-won directly asked the manager what he really wanted to say. The manager turned away and said, "I hope you won't cry alone anymore. I can't bear to see that." Ji-won felt annoyed and asked, "Are you this concerned about another girl? Does Hyen know?" The manager froze and asked, "What?" Ji-won angrily stated, "I know the two of you are in a relationship." Didn't he feel guilty towards Hyeni? The department head looked a bit flustered, and Ji-won mentioned that even though it was just her hunch, it seemed like that was the case. She added, "So please don't pay any more attention to me, or else I'll spill all the tea to Hyeni." Little did Ji-won know, the boss was about to reveal that the relationship between the two was nothing like she imagined. "Hyen is my little sister," the department head said. Ji-won's face went pale as she asked again. The department head urged her to keep this under wraps at the company since it was a bit of a sensitive situation. He clarified that he didn't show any favoritism toward Hyein, even though she was his sister. He just hoped Jiwon wouldn't get the wrong idea. Jiwon finally realized they were actually siblings. The department head added that, although he had a crush, he was still flying solo. A moment later the phone rang with a cheerful beep. Hyeini's voice, tinged with exhaustion, asked, "Why are you calling me at this ungodly hour? I still have to finish my plan." Hyeini told her that Jiwon already knew they were siblings, which made Hyeini extremely unhappy. Jean-Hook suggested she could pretend not to know. Hein retorted, "Is it really the right time for you to meet my benefactor?" She scolded her brother for putting pressure on girls and warned him that if he kept it up, he might end up in the long-term singles club. Jean-Hook asked back, "What's the difference between them?" Hein inquired if he was going on a business trip next week and promised to help him in every way possible, but reminded him not to act recklessly. The reason she helped her brother was because she thought that men like Hangyu were just total losers. Everyone in the company knew about that guy and Sumin's little romance, but since Sumin was Jiwon's best friend, she decided to let it slide. However, Hyeini added, this is definitely something we can't overlook. Jiwon had made her grand return home. She flopped down on the bed, utterly exhausted, replaying the scene from earlier in her head. The words of the department head echoed in her ears. Jiwon buried her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks as she wondered why she had done that back then. It's like going on an adventure solo, isn't it? Park and Han's story really took her by surprise. It turned out there were so many people who cared about her, including Hyein and Assistant Jane. If she had been braver back then, would the plot have twisted differently? Suddenly, Jiwon reminded herself to stop daydreaming. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford. She would stop at nothing to get revenge on the couple who ruined her life and absolutely would not live like before. The next day, Park Min-hwan was surprised to receive the food package Jiwon had sent over. She smiled beautifully, thinking he hadn't had breakfast, so she bought him an egg sandwich, unsure if he'd like it. Min-hwan joyfully moved closer to her. Of course he liked it. He wasn't angry at all, and kindly asked if she had gotten home late yesterday. Jiwon smiled apologetically, saying she was so tired that she just went to sleep as soon as she got home. Min-hwan thought to himself that she had been distant for a while, but now she seemed back to normal. However, since she was so beautiful, he let it slide. He suggested that if she was going to be late in the future, she should just call him to pick her up. At that moment, Su-min chimed in, asking Jiwon if she had a date today, since she was all dressed up and made up for work. Yesterday she had dressed elegantly, thinking Jiwon was meeting her boyfriend, but when she saw him looking lost, she decided to approach Jiwon. "Hey Jiwon, who are you all dressed up to meet?" Jiwon replied that she was just meeting a few old classmates. The two of them flirtatiously made plans for dinner, making Su-min green with envy. She secretly cursed Jiwon for being a little dressed up and acting all high and mighty, thinking that no matter what, she would always be beneath her level. Jiwon had clearly noticed that attitude. Su-min couldn't charm him as she wanted, so now she wanted to snatch Park Min-hwan for herself. Her nature was to take whatever she wanted, and Jiwon knew this well. So, she decided to use that trait to her advantage. Su-min was now completely in her grasp, with no way to escape. Just then, Haine appeared and apologized for being late due to traffic on the bus. Cheerfully, she wished Jiwon a good morning. Jiwon smiled back at Hyeini. It was only now that she realized, upon closer inspection, that Ji-hook and Hyeini looked quite similar. Just then, Ji-hook glanced over, and Jiwon blushed, quickly turning away. His comment about not having a girlfriend but liking someone yesterday was full of implications. A little later, Jean-hook announced in the meeting that Assistant Jane's proposal had been selected for the new product project, set to launch in the summer. Everyone should prepare for overtime, and once the design department finished the prototype, they should start field surveys. Team leader Kim felt extremely annoyed. Assistant Jane thought to herself that although this was good news, working overtime meant no one would be able to take care of her child. Jean-hook also announced that he would be absent soon due to a business trip, and Assistant Jane would be in charge of his work. Assistant Jane nodded, thinking that if she did well this time she would get promoted soon, but she would probably be much busier. Her child was surely waiting for her to come home first and foremost. She would strive to provide her child with a fulfilling life. She could not let this project slip away. At that moment, she unexpectedly received a message from Jiwon, who had a favor to ask of her. Assistant Jane was taken aback when Jiwon expressed her desire to join the team, but why was Soo-min involved too? She knew the two had a great relationship, but this project was crucial. She understood Jiwon's intentions to promote Soo-min to a full-time position, but she feared that Soo-min still had many shortcomings. Jiwon replied, "It's not that I'm convinced, but I believe Manager Kim will try to sabotage the project." Assistant Jane, confused, asked how that related to Soo-min. Jiwon responded that it seemed Manager Kim had feelings for Soo-min. Assistant Jane was utterly shocked. "That old man, 40 years old, with a 20-year-old girl?" Jiwon nodded. "That's why his head is balding like that," Assistant Jane concluded. "So, Jaewon, you're saying that if Soo-min joins the team, Manager Kim will recklessly sabotage the project?" Jiwon nodded. "If we want to succeed this time, we need Jo Soo-min." A little while later, Assistant Jane stood before everyone, presenting herself as the team leader for this project. This project would be a collaboration between the marketing and development departments, and they would work hard to launch it by summer. Jiwon also introduced herself as the assistant who would take on the overall support role. Another person introduced himself as Leong-suk, the head of the second team in the development department. Their department had crafted prototypes within a limited time frame, totaling 3 types for field testing. Assistant Jane was pleased, thanked them, and praised the beautiful designs, suggesting they could go into testing right away. Jiwon thought to herself, "Thank goodness the prototypes are visually appealing." The issue was Jo Soo-min, who was worried about Manager Kim. They had included her in the team, and Jiwon was concerned that Soo-min might tarnish Assistant Jane's reputation soon. Soo-min was directly assigned by Assistant Jane to conduct surveys at the supermarket, but she immediately requested a different task as she wasn't good at interacting with people. Assistant Jane refused, stating that this was an important job and, who knows, Soo-min's bright smile might leave a good impression on others. With no other choice, Soo-min reluctantly agreed. She was also afraid that Hyeni would snatch the opportunity to become a full-time employee from her. And besides, working with Assistant Jane meant collaborating with Park Min-hwan, so she had to go along with it. However, Soo-min felt that inviting customers to try and evaluate the new product was humiliating for her. Soo-min was furious. "How could Assistant Jane assign me this task? You thought I would just obediently do this?" She pulled out her phone to play games, ignoring the customers who came to try it out. She answered their questions half-heartedly, thinking that just because it was a free sample, she didn't need to put in much effort. People would still come to try it, and there would be plenty of social media buzz. A couple also stopped by the counter where Soo-min was sitting. The wife asked her if the dishes contained any nuts. Soo-min still didn't take her eyes off her phone and said, "No." The wife introduced the new product to her husband and handed him a bite. Just as he took a bite, the husband suddenly felt uncomfortable. The food box he was holding fell to the ground as his body broke out in red spots. The wife panicked and shouted, "Hyun's allergic to nuts!" Meanwhile, Soo-min was still glued to her phone, unable to look up, annoyed that they were making noise and interrupting her record-breaking fish cake game. Seeing Soo-min's attitude, the woman couldn't hold back anymore. She yelled, demanding to know why Soo-min said the dishes didn't contain nuts, and how she planned to take responsibility for this. Soo-min folded her phone and indifferently asked, "What do you want me to do now?" She claimed it wasn't her fault, saying the couple ate recklessly just because it was free food. This made the couple furious. They demanded to see the manager and added that if they were in pain, they should hurry to the hospital. Just then, Dr. Manhwa witnessed the scene. He rushed over and asked Soo-min what had happened. The couple recounted the incident to Dr. Manhwa. Manhwa bowed his head in apology, saying he would take them to the hospital immediately. He turned to Soo-min and told her he would take them to the hospital first and that she should follow behind. Sumin felt scared, secretly blaming Assistant Jane for making her do this to humiliate her. At the hospital, Park Min-hwan asked Sumin if Ji-won had reminded her that the trial products contained allergens. Sumin cried, saying Ji-won might have mentioned it, but she hadn't heard, and apologized to him for that. Min-hwan felt a headache coming on. He was about to marry Ji-won and didn't want her to face disciplinary action, but he also didn't want Sumin to get fired. He suggested that Sumin shouldn't talk about this with anyone and told her to go apologize to the customers so they wouldn't file a complaint with the supermarket. Hearing Min-hwan agree to help her, Sumin hugged him tightly to thank him. Sumin said that even if she got fired, it wouldn't matter, but she was worried about Ji-won. Min-hwan comforted her, thinking that Ji-won had truly found a great friend. He urged her not to worry and to trust him. Min-hwan reached up to wipe her tears. In that moment, Sumin was determined to win this man over. Meanwhile, Ji-won was working, thinking about how Sumin and Min-hwan were managing their business. Just then, her phone rang. It was Uncle Min-hwan calling. He asked her why she hadn't told Sumin that the third sample contained peanuts. Luckily, he had arrived just in time to resolve the issue, or it could have turned into a big problem. Ji-won remembered that she had already discussed this with Sumin and realized everything. She didn't want to say anything more. Ji-won instructed him not to tell Sumin that she knew about it and asked him to comfort and reassure her on her behalf. Ji-won chuckled to herself, realizing that Sumin had truly lived up to her expectations. That evening at Assistant Jen's house, as soon as she walked in, she asked if her child had been well behaved at home and if they had troubled the grandparents. She asked her mother if the baby had been a handful, and her mother replied that the child had been very well behaved. Her father and husband asked if she was hungry and urged her to shower and come eat, saying they had prepared kimchi soup. She obediently went to take a shower. It had been a long time since she had bathed with such a light heart. It felt right to follow Ji-won's advice. She remembered a few days ago when she had shared her worries with Ji-won about not having anyone to look after her child. Ji-won had suggested that she asked her biological parents for help, but her parents thought she was living happily and didn't know that her husband had lost his job. She didn't want them to worry. Ji-won encouraged her to reconsider, saying that parents often think of their children and would do anything for them. She hoped that she could have an honest conversation with her parents. Who knows, they might become a solid support for her. She had thought a lot about it and couldn't give up on this project. If she got promoted, her family could live a happier life. Just as she finished her shower and stepped out, her husband rushed over to ask why she was calling her parents and talking about him losing his job. He told her she was crazy. Didn't she just need to go to work early and do overtime? She told him she had to work overtime with the staff at the company, and if he was uncomfortable, he could just leave the house. This house was under her name, and she was the one who paid for both the mortgage and living expenses. He raised his voice, questioning if she was trying to show off just because she had money. Furious, she told him to either go out and earn some cash or stay home and take care of the kid. If he didn't want to be kicked out of the house, he'd better get his act together. The next morning, as soon as she stepped into the office, Ji-won received a call from Assistant Jen. Listening to her, Ji-won said she was doing great, and from now on she could finally breathe easy. Assistant Jen thanked her, and Ji-won felt happy for her, since everything seemed to be settling down. While they were chatting, Manager Jen Hook approached her, causing Ji-won to jump a little. He asked if she was done talking with Assistant Jen. She replied that she was finished, but if she remembered correctly, today was his business trip day, so why was he here? Jin Hook explained that his flight was in the afternoon. He mentioned he had a few things to discuss with her, so he stopped by the office for a bit before heading out. Ji-won was puzzled as to why he would come all this way to talk when he had a trip coming up. The two of them headed to a cafe on the first floor, and as she followed him inside, she muttered to herself that she should have just kept talking to Assistant Jane. Jung Hook asked Ji-won what she wanted to drink, and she shyly replied that she'd like an Americano. When the cashier mentioned a free sandwich, Ji-won recognized the voice as very familiar. She looked up, over Jung Hook's shoulder, and realized it was Park Man-han. Jung Hook pulled out his card to pay, and Man-han greeted Ji-won with a bright smile, surprised to see her there. Ji-won was taken aback. Jeong-hyu was equally surprised, not expecting Ji-won to know him, and shot Man-han a not-so-friendly look. Man-han recognized him as the guy who picked Ji-won up at the class reunion and asked if he was Ji-won's boss. Ji-won felt confused when Jin-hook asked Man-han if he was the one who yelled at her to check the block. Man-han admitted it, saying he was running a cafe here and suggested they meet up more often in the future. Ji-won awkwardly agreed. When their drinks arrived, she wondered why, out of all the cafes, it had to be this one. Jin-hook asked if they were classmates. He pointed out that Man-han hadn't mentioned he was opening a cafe here. She told him she didn't know why either, but she was aware it was because of his unrequited feelings for her. She asked Jin-hook if there was something he wanted to tell her. Jin-hook sipped his coffee and mentioned that while he was on a business trip, manager Kim would take over managing the work. He informed her that Assistant Jane's project wouldn't go through manager Kim, but would report directly to the hubs. Ji-won asked if he knew about the poor relationship between the two of them. He told her that was a personal matter for both of them, and as a superior, it wasn't appropriate for him to interfere, but if the man was fair in his dealings, things would be different. Ji-won inquired if, in a situation like the last time, manager Kim could face disciplinary action. She smiled and thanked the manager for his concern. Such a hint was indeed not a waste of time. Over tea, she reminded him to be careful on his business trip. When work hours began, she headed to the office. Suddenly, Jae-won stopped in her tracks. She spotted manager Kim chatting with Hye-in. He was laughing and talking with her. Jae-won sat down and pondered why it had to be today. She was sure he was up to something. A moment later, Hye-in rushed up to her, visibly upset. Hye-in explained that something had upset her, and Ji-won stood up, offering to make her a coffee. As she passed by manager Kim's office, she saw him on the phone with someone. After handing the coffee to Hye-in, Ji-won asked what had happened. Hye-in revealed that manager Kim wanted her to give him the plan she had written earlier. Ji-won was taken aback when Hye-in mentioned that he said he would let her join the project team and become a full-time employee if she put his name as the author. This morning, Hye-in had been confused when the manager called her in. He said he usually held her in high regard and always wanted her to become a full-time employee. He asked if she remembered the plan she submitted when she first joined the company, and of course, she did. Back then, he had criticized her plan harshly. Thinking of this, Hye-in decided to act as if she had never heard the earlier proposals. Manager Kim told her to reconsider, asking if behaving this way would really help her become a full-time employee. Hye-in angrily turned back and asked if he was trying to threaten her. He calmly replied that she should think carefully if she didn't want to be fired. Hye-in couldn't stand the thought of her brilliant idea being snatched away by someone else, even if it meant risking her job. Ji-won sees Hye-in's project as a gold mine, and now the head of the department is scheming to steal it. Hye-in asks Ji-won if she knows which religion ranks second among the most followed and believed in. The answer is Islam, boasting over 1.3 billion followers. Yet they don't indulge in fast food. Ji-won suggests that targeting the Muslim community could be a savvy strategy for gaining a foothold. Ji-won encourages Hye-in to hand over the plan to the head of the department, confident that he won't be able to pull it off. Hye-in questions why Ji-won is so sure about that. Ji-won explains that there will be risks involved, but she wants them to follow his orders for now. Later she'll find a way to reclaim the idea for Hye-in, but not just yet. Hye-in agrees and hands over the plan to the head of the department, who immediately submits it to the CEO. The CEO is highly impressed with the proposal. It's been ages since he's seen such a creative project. He mentions that if the project gets the green light, they'll need to send someone to Arabia for market research. The head of the department instantly thinks of Hye-in and plans to find a way to send her there, telling the CEO that their team is also working on another project about salads. The CEO is persuaded and decides to prioritize the head of the department's project first. He secretly rejoices, seeing this as a once-in-a-lifetime chance to regain power. Only then will Soo-min trust and lean on him. She'll date and marry him. Meanwhile, Ji-won heads upstairs to the rooftop, bringing the documents to meet the head of the department. Just as Ji-won predicted, Assistant Jen's project has been temporarily shelved and pushed back behind the head of the department's project. Ji-won tells Assistant Jen to wait by the seaside for the enemy's body to surface. She remarks that for that to happen, someone needs to toss that body into the sea, and she's ready to be the one to do it. The head of the department is standing outside, smoking, waiting for her. He asks her what's up, and she presents the stack of documents in front of him. Ji-won says this is the report she has reorganized, and it will be beneficial for the project he's working on. This is the first step in Ji-won's plan to send him to the depths of the sea. The head of the department receives the report and skims through it. He asks her if she did it all by herself. Ji-won tells him that this industry has great potential and many businesses are targeting it, so they need to act faster than the competition. She suggests starting with advertising on social media and clearly analyze this in her report. The head of the department, Kim, is pleased. He thought that department head Ji-hook wouldn't be able to refuse. He cheerfully asks Ji-won if she wants to join the project team. She replies that, as long as he remembers her when he gets promoted, she's in. In the following days, everything unfolded just as she had planned. When the project information was made public, the company's stock price soared. The director praised him for achieving great success, and once the project wrapped up successfully, he would definitely get promoted. The head of the department, Kim, was over the moon. Shortly after, news about the company's branch opening in Arabia was splashed across several newspapers. That morning, at Unke Company, the head of the department, Kim, was walking and singing, greeting every employee he encountered. The employees were whispering among themselves, puzzled by his sudden change in demeanor. His phone buzzed with a message from Sue Men, who said she had overslept and hadn't had breakfast. Head of the department, Kim, offered to buy her some food, and Sue Men thanked him, adding that she wanted some strawberry milk too. Head of the department, Kim, beamed, finding Sue Men really adorable. Suddenly, he received a call from Secretary Han, who informed him that the director wanted to see him. He happily rushed to meet the director, feeling like everything was going his way. At the door, he knocked and waited eagerly, then joyfully stepped inside, completely unaware of the storm brewing. The director was furious and threw a stack of reports at his head. He demanded to know if Kim knew what was going on and how he planned to take responsibility for the mess. Looking at the newspaper reporting on the kidnapping of South Koreans by Islamic extremists, he realized the company's stock had plummeted. At that moment, head of the department, Kim, understood the gravity of the situation. He bowed his head in apology and suggested they halt the project for now. The director angrily asked if Kim knew how much money the company had already invested, demanding that he come up with a solution quickly. Nervously, Kim rubbed his bald head and confessed to the director that the plan was actually from an intern on his team. He babbled on about wanting to give the new intern a chance, so he claimed the plan as his own. He suggested publishing an apology saying it was the mistake of a 26-year-old intern, which might calm the public outcry. Hearing this, the director seemed to recall something and asked what the intern's name was that team leader Kim mentioned. He told the director that her name was Hyene. He even proposed publishing an article calling her the Holler Girl, thinking that if he threw Hyene under the bus, everything would be fine and the company would avoid this crisis. The director asked team leader Kim if he had told Hyene that he was the one who initiated the project. Of course, Kim had already said that. Immediately, the director demanded that he go tell Hyene that he had nothing to do with this. Everything was his own doing. The director shouted so loudly that everyone outside the office could hear. All of this was because of him, and now the branch in Arabia was also in danger. Team leader Kim walked out dejectedly, and everyone looked at him, whispering, "Because of him, everything is in chaos." At this moment, team leader Kim could only hang his head in silence. He didn't dare say anything. Pulling out a strawberry milk box from his bag, he tried to cheer himself up, reminding himself that he still had Sue Men by his side, and together they would get through this tough time. But when he brought the drink to Sue Men, she said she didn't drink strawberry milk. Confused, he asked why she had told him this morning that she wanted to drink it. Sue Men turned away without answering. Team leader Kim couldn't understand why she had changed her mind like that. Everyone in the office looked at him with sympathetic eyes. He gritted his teeth. It was all Jiwon's fault. She definitely knew Hyein had connections, which was why she befriended her. If he hadn't listened to her and leaked the documents to the press beforehand, things wouldn't have gotten this bad. Using the excuse of needing to submit a report today, he vented his frustration on Jiwon. But of course, Jiwon was already prepared. She had placed the report on his desk and texted him about it. With nothing he could do to Jiwon, he yelled out loud. He said she had pranked him on the street, and seeing Jiwon's attitude only made him more furious. He dramatically claimed that Jiwon's rudeness was a result of her parents' upbringing. Hearing this, Jiwon's expression darkened and her hand clenched tightly. He could say whatever he wanted about her, but she just couldn't stand it when he disrespected her parents. The head of the committee wasn't done yet. For him, everything that had escalated to this point was all Gan's fault. He raised his hand, ready to strike Jiwon. Department head Jinyu Huk witnessed everything unfold and swiftly intervened to stop him. Jinyu grabbed the collar of the head of the finance department. To Kim's surprise, Jinyu lifted him up high and demanded that he immediately apologize to Jiwon. The head of the department anxiously asked when he would be back from his business trip, but Ji-hook ignored him, demanding that he quickly apologize. Head of the committee Kim reluctantly apologized to Jiwon, pleading for him to stop what he was doing. Ji-hook listened to her and let go, causing the committee head to crash to the ground. Seeing this, Jiwon felt a twinge of sympathy. Jin-hook declared that he would send a disciplinary notice to the company's disciplinary board. This incident was definitely not going to end with just a salary cut. A few days later, the head of the committee received the company's disciplinary report. In addition to the failed assault and defamation of assistant Ji-won, he was also facing extra penalties for stealing Hae-jin's ideas. Head of the committee Kim was taken aback when he overheard Soo-men chatting with Park Man-hwan. She told him that she and the boss had no relationship and that she planned to transfer to another department. Mainan didn't believe her, saying it wasn't necessary. The head of the committee was stealthily trailing behind, eavesdropping on their conversation. Soo-men asked Minan how the head of the department would face disciplinary action, and he said it was likely the High Council would take serious measures. The head of the committee's expression darkened when he heard what Minan said to Soo-men. He bought her a drink and told her that from now on she didn't need to butter him up anymore. He then asked if getting demoted and suspended for 6 months was like being kicked off the stage. Hearing this, the head of the committee rushed in and threw a punch, straight at Park Man-won's face. He berated Park Man-won as a dimwit, asking if he wanted to get choked by him. Soo-men asked why he would do that. He shouted loudly that he and Soo-men were about to get married, even though he already had a girlfriend and was still flirting with Soo-men. Soo-men felt extremely embarrassed when manager Kim announced this to everyone. She definitely didn't want Park Man-hwan to know about her relationship with him. Manager Kim wasn't giving up. He told Soo-men to clarify whether their love was real, and she panicked, denying everything. Everyone in the company witnessing the scene started believing the rumors about her and manager Kim. Soo-men told manager Kim he wasn't thinking straight, which flustered him. He asked if she was acting cold towards him because of Park Man-won. Seeing so many people whispering, Soo-men hurriedly ran away, feeling embarrassed. Now everyone in the company would know all about her and manager Kim. She ran into the restroom and locked the door. She thought manager Kim could no longer take advantage of her, but now it would be very difficult for her to become a permanent employee. What would she do from now on?